Sherlock Holmes and the Encrypted Letter, an honoring audiobook's original story from the reminiscences of John H. Watson, M.D., Chapter 1, The Visitor from Parliament. It was the third morning of October 1892, a morning crisp and coppered with the turning of autumn leaves, when Sherlock Holmes received an unexpected visitor at 221B Baker Street, a man whose arrival would embroil us in one of the most perplexing and perilous cases of his career. I had returned from my morning constitutional around Regent's Park and was halfway through a tepid cup of tea when the doorbell rang, followed by Mrs. Hudson's familiar shuffle up the stairs and a brief knock. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes," she announced, her expression unreadable. "Says it's a matter of the utmost urgency. Brought a letter of recommendation from the Home Office." "Show him in, Mrs. Hudson," Holmes said without rising from his chair. He was sprawled in his usual posture, elbows resting on the arms of the chair, fingers steepled beneath his pointed chin, eyes closed as though in meditation. Yet I knew better. Holmes was listening with preternatural alertness to the rhythm of our visitor's steps on the staircase. The man who entered was tall, thin, and disheveled, with a prominent aquiline nose and a pair of eyes that darted about the room as though assessing it for hidden threats. His clothing, though expensive, was poorly fitted and carelessly worn, suggesting a man of means but little attention to sartorial matters. A silk cravat clung limply to his collar, and his overcoat, lined with fox fur, hung open despite the chill. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said with a stiff bow. "My name is Archibald Penhaligon, Member of Parliament for South Norwood. I come on a matter of grave concern, both political and, I fear, criminal." Holmes gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Please, Mr. Penhaligon, do sit. Would you care for some tea?" The man waved the offer away with a trembling hand. "I've no appetite, sir. You must forgive my discomposure. I've spent the last 2 nights in a state of acute distress." "Then tell us what has driven you here," Holmes said, "and what connection it has with the Home Office, if any." Penhaligon reached into his inner coat pocket and drew out a slim leather portfolio. From it, he extracted a sheet of parchment, folded several times and bound with red twine, and a letter emblazoned with the seal of the Home Secretary. He handed the latter to Holmes, who opened it with a flick of his long fingers and scanned it quickly. "Well, this is indeed curious," he muttered. "Watson, the Secretary himself, requests our cooperation. It seems you are not exaggerating, Mr. Penhaligon." The MP leaned forward, the flickering gaslight catching the sheen of sweat on his brow. "My colleague in Parliament, Mr. Algernon Stowe, disappeared from his London residence 2 nights ago. No note, no evidence of foul play, simply vanished. But this," he gestured to the folded parchment, "was found tucked inside the false bottom of a drawer in his study. A housemaid discovered it quite by accident while searching for writing paper." Holmes took the bound parchment and carefully untied the twine. As he unfolded it, I leaned in to observe. What lay before us was no ordinary letter. The page was covered with a series of symbols, numbers, and curious phrases rendered in blocky, angular handwriting. "Red sky over black reef, midnight tide brings the iron wolf. 34 Driginen, 23 Drisbers. Echo follows torch to silent halls. The sunken crown lies where the sirens sleep." Beneath the text in the lower right corner was a sigil, a circle intersected by a diagonal cross, and within its center, a crude drawing of what appeared to be a skull surrounded by laurels. "Most evocative," Holmes murmured, his gray eyes alight with interest. "Not a cipher in the conventional sense. A poetic code, if I am not mistaken." Penhaligon nodded. "Yes, the chief inspector called it romantic nonsense and dismissed it. But I know Stowe. He was not a fanciful man. Cautious, methodical, deeply secretive. He would not have written this, nor kept it without cause." "Quite," said Holmes. He rose suddenly and began to pace the room, the parchment held delicately between 2 fingers. "You say there's no evidence of violence, no forced entry?" "None," Penhaligon replied. "His front door was locked from within. The constables who first arrived on the scene had to gain entry through a side window. No signs of a struggle, though his study was in disarray. Papers scattered, a drawer pried open, yet nothing appears to have been stolen." Holmes halted by the window and looked out onto Baker Street, lost in thought. "Tell me, Mr. Penhaligon, did Mr. Stowe have any enemies? Personal or political?" A shadow passed over the MP's face. None I can name with certainty, but he was working on something. A private initiative he never disclosed to the House. I suspected it was an investigation into historical land claims, perhaps even colonial assets long thought lost. Treasure? Holmes asked, without turning. I would not go so far, said Penhaligon, though his hesitation was telling. Holmes handed the coded letter to me and turned back to our guest. I believe, sir, that Mr. Stowe has not been abducted. I believe he has concealed himself voluntarily for reasons that have yet to be fully uncovered. Penhaligon paled. You believe this is an act of subterfuge? Precisely, and if I am correct, then we are already several steps behind him. I examined the parchment again, trying to make sense of the cryptic lines. This portion here, 34 Grian, 23 Dubu, those are coordinates, are they not? Holmes smiled. Indeed, Watson. Latitude and longitude, if memory serves. That location lies off the coast of Madeira in the eastern Atlantic, an odd location for a British MP to concern himself with. Unless, Penhaligon said slowly, he discovered something. A clue. A relic. Something from the age of piracy, perhaps. Exactly, said Holmes, resuming his seat and steepling his fingers once more. Mr. Stowe has left us a trail, and we must follow it before others. Less scrupulous and more dangerous find it first. There was a long pause in which the only sound was the hiss of the gas lamps and the distant clatter of hooves on cobblestone. Holmes looked up sharply. Tell me, Mr. Penhaligon, has anyone else seen this letter? Only myself and the 2 constables assigned to the scene. I was entrusted with its safekeeping. Good. Then let us proceed with haste. I shall need access to Stowe's residence, as well as any personal correspondences, journals, or nautical records in his possession. Watson, we leave within the hour. Where are we going? I asked, already rising. Holmes gave a thin smile. To South Norwood, to a study filled with secrets and shadows, and from there, perhaps, to the ends of the earth. It was just before noon when Holmes and I arrived at the South Norwood address, a stately red brick townhouse at the corner of Pelham Crescent. The autumn air had turned raw with a sharp east wind, and the London sky hung low and leaden above us, casting the street in an almost funereal gray. A constable in a cape and spiked helmet waited at the wrought iron gate and offered a sharp salute as Mr. Penhaligon identified us. Inspector Garrison's inside, sir, the constable reported, lifting the latch for us. As we approached the door, Holmes paused abruptly, kneeling to inspect a faint scrape along the bottom stair. He ran his gloved hand lightly over the stone. Boot heel, he muttered. Not recent. Possibly Stowe's. Inside, we were greeted by a stout, balding man in a gray wool coat who introduced himself curtly as Inspector Garrison of the Croydon Division. He looked at Holmes with wary deference and offered a half-hearted handshake. Afternoon, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Watson. Bit of a wild goose chase, if you ask me, Garrison said. No signs of forced entry, no ransom, no demands. The gentleman probably left of his own accord, caught a late train, or fancied a sea voyage. Indeed, Holmes replied coolly, and yet he left behind a cryptic parchment concealed in a false drawer. Garrison scoffed. Yes, that riddle nonsense. Honestly, I've better use of my time. I've seen enough lords and ministers dash off to continental trysts and come back flushed with apologies. Forgive me, Holmes said with a thin smile, but your disinterest is precisely why we are needed. We ascended a narrow flight of stairs, the wooden railing gleaming from years of polish, to reach the late Mr. Stowe's study. The room was spacious but dim, with heavy curtains drawn tight against the outside world. The air within carried a musty scent of stale tobacco and beeswax. Shelves lined the walls, filled with histories, naval records, parliamentary ledgers, and books in several languages. A globe sat in one corner, slightly ajar along the equator seam. On the far wall hung a portrait of a sloop of war braving a tempest, its sails torn and mast snapped. Holmes drifted into the room with his usual cat-like grace, circling the central desk like a falcon eyeing prey. Papers were indeed scattered across the surface, some crumpled, some half-burned in the hearth. There, Penhaligon said, pointing to the center drawer, which had been roughly pried open, revealing splintered wood and bent hinges. Holmes knelt beside it and ran his long fingers along the inside. Crude work, but effective. The false bottom was clever, yet not impervious. A man desperate or determined would find it eventually. I moved to examine the fireplace, where a few charred sheets remained. I used the poker to spread the ashes, revealing only fragments, a sketch of what looked to be a coastline, an arc of compass bearings, and the faint inked words, Caravel, Dolores, 1685. A Spanish vessel? I asked aloud. Holmes turned, eyes flashing. Yes, Watson, and the Caravel Dolores was not merely Spanish, but infamous. It was last sighted near the Canary Islands, carrying the confiscated hoard of the pirate Don Salvador Quintana, a name whispered in maritime circles with a peculiar mixture of awe and dread. Penhaligon stepped back, visibly shaken. Good heavens! You mean to say this letter, this riddle, points to pirate treasure? Holmes waved a dismissive hand. Do not let the romance of it sway you too quickly. Treasure, yes, but not mere gold doubloons buried in sand. I suspect we are looking at a historical asset of political interest, perhaps colonial documents, treaties, or incriminating records tied to Spanish or Portuguese expeditions. But the coordinates, the map? I said. Yes, Holmes murmured, returning to the globe. He rotated it with practiced ease and stopped it with a finger at 34-degree latitude and 23° longitude, just west of Madeira. Remote, deep sea, yet navigable for a man with the proper means. Garrison cleared his throat behind us. If your theory holds, gentlemen, we've not merely lost a man. We're embroiled in a chase, a hunt. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Exactly. And we must determine who else is aware. Mr. Stowe may not be the only one on this trail. At that moment, a slight knock came at the study door, and Mrs. Ellen Granger, the Stowe household's housekeeper, stepped inside. She was a narrow, dignified woman in her 50s, with a strict part in her graying hair and hands reddened from years of labor. Begging your pardon, she said, voice hushed. But I thought it might be important. There was a visitor 2 nights ago, very late. I heard the bell at 11:30. Mr. Guéry? Stowe answered it himself, and they spoke in hushed tones for nearly 20 minutes. I never saw the man's face. He wore a heavy cloak and hat. When he left, Mr. Stowe did not return to his room. Holmes crossed the room to her. Mrs. Granger, can you recall any details? Accent? Scent? Anything? She hesitated. He spoke with a sharpness. Not local. Foreign, perhaps. Irish or Cornish. And his coat smelled of tar and salt. Holmes turned to me. A man of the sea, Watson, not a parliamentarian. Mrs. Granger continued, voice lower now. When I came down at dawn, the back door was ajar. Mr. Stowe's valise was gone. Then he fled, Penhaligon said darkly. No, Holmes corrected him. He departed with precision. This was planned. That letter was not forgotten. It was planted. There was a long pause in which the only sound was the ticking of the study clock. Holmes straightened suddenly. We must acquire passenger logs for all ships departing Portsmouth, Southampton, and Tilbury within the last 48 hours. Also, inquiries at Lloyd's of London regarding any private charters. Watson, you'll accompany me. Penhaligon, you'd best remain in contact with the Home Secretary. And Inspector Garrison. Guard this house carefully. If others are aware of Stowe's discovery, they may return. Garrison grunted. What makes you think they haven't already? Holmes paused. Because nothing was taken. But now that we've disturbed the waters, sharks will begin to circle. He cast one last glance at the coated parchment, now folded carefully in his coat pocket. Gentlemen, he said, the game is not merely afoot. It is afoot at sea. The next 2 hours passed in a flurry of inquiries, telegrams, and cab rides. Holmes, ever the relentless pursuer of truth, commandeered my energy with a dozen errands as we dashed from South Norwood to the Thames Embankment, and from there to the tall granite columns of the Admiralty Archives. There, in a dim room lined with naval registers and decaying salt-creased maps, we encountered a man who would become our first new ally in this most convoluted affair. Captain Elias Hargrave was a retired officer of the Royal Navy, now archivist and maritime historian. With a froth of white hair and spectacles that seemed perpetually fogged, he was a relic of Queen Victoria's earlier campaigns, and spoke as though time had long since loosened its hold on him. You said the Caravel Dolores? He repeated, tapping his pen to his temple. Ah, yes, cursed vessel, if you listen to the sea tales. Spanish ship, commandeered in 1685 by Don Salvador Quintana, a Portuguese privateer turned pirate after betrayal by his crown. Set sail from Havana with a hold full of treasure. Aztec gold, it's said, though that's surely embellishment. Holmes leaned forward across the dusty desk. Do you know where she was last seen? Indeed I do. wrecked during a storm off Black Reef, an outcropping west of Madeira. That portion of the Atlantic is dotted with sunken wrecks from the age of sail. Hargrave pulled open a drawer and removed a long vellum chart. He tapped a faded point on the map. Here, latitude 34 degrees north, longitude 23 degrees west. The very coordinates in the letter, I murmured. Quite, Holmes said. And what, Captain, is the current interest in the Dolores? Hargrave chuckled. A few mad Americans make inquiries now and then. Some claim to have found pieces of her, copper hull fragments, an iron figurehead shaped like a wolf. But treasure? No, none recovered. That sea is too deep for most divers. Unless, Holmes said quietly, one has resources and motivation. Just then, a uniformed clerk entered the room with a telegram and handed it wordlessly to Holmes. He read it once, then again, and frowned. It's from Lestrade, he explained. He's intercepted a message sent from a post office in the East End, coded but partially decipherable. Listen to this. Shipment leaves Friday. Stowe has the parchment. Secure the cipher. Do not trust the Red Fox. Red Fox? I asked. Holmes stood, already in motion. A code name, no doubt, but I suspect it denotes a person, not a vessel. And if someone else seeks that cipher, we are no longer alone in this search. By late afternoon, the skies above London had turned a murky bronze as clouds gathered over the river. We returned briefly to Baker Street to collect Holmes's monogrammed leather satchel and my revolver, at Holmes's quiet insistence, and were preparing to depart when there came a knock at the door more tentative than the last. Mrs. Hudson opened it to reveal a boy no older than 13, hair wind-tossed, with soot across his cheeks and a messenger's bag slung over one shoulder. He removed his cap and stepped in sheepishly. Message for Mr. Holmes. Urgent. Holmes took the folded note and flipped it open with a flick of his thumb. He froze. What is it? I asked. He handed me the note. It was written in an uneven, blockish scrawl. Too many eyes in London. The wolf follows you. If you seek Stowe, go to Pier 19 before midnight. Alone. No police. What in God's name does that mean? I asked. Holmes turned to the boy. Who gave you this? A foreign gent, sir. Big coat. Beard. Paid me a sovereign to bring it here and not speak a word to anyone else. Did you see where he went? No, sir. Disappeared into the fog. Holmes drew his dressing gown tighter and paced the room. This changes matters. Pier 19. That's Wapping. A derelict portion of the docks. Precisely where I would meet someone who doesn't wish to be seen. Penhaligon, who had returned to join us for supper, leaned forward from his chair. Surely you don't intend to go alone, Holmes? I do, he replied, but not unprepared. He turned to me. Watson, if I do not return by 2 o'clock in the morning, you will alert both Lestrade and the Home Secretary. Bring reinforcements, and watch the house. Whoever sent this may come looking for the parchment. I don't like this, I said. It's a trap. Undoubtedly, Holmes agreed, but if we are to uncover Mr. Stowe's purpose and his location, it's a trap I must walk into. The fog had settled thick as wool by the time Holmes reached the East India docks. From my window at Baker Street, I watched the gaslights blur to amber smudges and the streets below grow quiet. I paced for the better part of an hour before I could no longer bear the waiting. Then, just before 1 o'clock, the bell rang. I rushed to the door expecting Holmes, but it was not he who stood there. A tall man in a gray seaman's coat, eyes pale and face unshaven, loomed in the frame. He was holding something in his gloved hand, a rolled document. Dr. Watson, he asked. I am. Message for Holmes, from the Red Fox. He thrust the scroll into my hands and vanished into the mist before I could utter another word. I unrolled it by the lamp. It was a map, crude but clear. Lines converged on a place labeled Enigmata, the city beneath. A new name had entered our pursuit. And with it, a promise that the journey ahead would reach beyond Parliament, beyond pirates, and into the deep places where men dared not tread. And Sherlock Holmes had just walked into it alone. Chapter 2. Shadows at Wapping. The fog lay thick over the Thames, muffling the city's usual clamor into a hushed murmur. Gas lamps cast halos of light, their glow barely penetrating the mist. I paced the sitting room of 221B Baker Street, the clocks ticking, marking the passage of time with an almost accusatory rhythm. Holmes had departed hours ago, following the cryptic message delivered by the street urchin. Suddenly, the door burst open, and Holmes entered, his coat damp from the fog, eyes gleaming with a mix of exhilaration and concern. "Watson," he began, shedding his coat, "our adversaries are more formidable than I anticipated." I gestured for him to sit, pouring a measure of brandy. "Tell me everything." He took the glass, sipping thoughtfully. Pier 19 was deserted, save for a lone figure cloaked in shadows. He identified himself as the Red Fox. His accent was unmistakably Portuguese, and his demeanor suggested a man accustomed to danger. I leaned forward. "Did he provide any information?" Holmes nodded. "He spoke of a secret society, the Brotherhood of the Abyss, dedicated to recovering the lost treasures of Don Salvador Quintana. They believe Stowe possesses the key to the Dolores' final resting place." I frowned. "And the map we possess?" "A fragment," Holmes replied. "The complete map was divided into 3 parts, each hidden separately to prevent misuse. Stowe had one. The Brotherhood seeks the others." Our conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, announcing Inspector Lestrade. Lestrade's expression was grave. "Holmes, Dr. Watson, we've received word of a break-in at the British Museum. A rare 17th century maritime journal was stolen, one believed to contain references to the Dolores." Holmes stood abruptly. "The Brotherhood moves swiftly. We must act faster." The museum's curator, Mr. Alastair Pembroke, met us at the entrance, his face pale. "The journal of Captain Hernando Alvarez," he explained. It detailed his encounters with Quintana and mentioned a hidden cache near Madeira. Holmes examined the display case, noting the precision of the break-in. Professional work. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. Lestrade interjected. "Security footage shows a figure in a naval officer's uniform, but the face was obscured." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, recall the portrait in Stowe's study, the sloop of war in a tempest. That ship bore the name Enigmata. We must find its logs." At the Admiralty, we met with archivist Margaret Hensley, a sharp-eyed woman with an encyclopedic knowledge of naval history. "Enigmata," she mused, scanning her records. "Commissioned in 1680, captained by Elias Thorncroft. Vanished in 1685 near the Azores." She retrieved a logbook, its pages yellowed with age. Holmes perused it, stopping at an entry. "March 3rd, 1685, sighted the Dolores. Engaged briefly before a storm separated us. Quintana's ship sustained damage, last seen drifting toward Black Reef." Holmes tapped the page. Black Reef, our next destination. Back at Baker Street, we gathered supplies and charted our course. Holmes sent telegrams to contacts in Lisbon and Madeira, seeking information on recent salvage operations near Black Reef. That evening, a letter arrived, sealed with a crimson wax emblem, a fox entwined with an anchor. Inside was a note. "Trust no one. The Brotherhood watches. Seek the lighthouse keeper at Ponta do Sol." Holmes studied the seal. The Red Fox again. Ponta do Sol is our waypoint. We secured passage aboard the HMS Resolute, a sturdy vessel bound for Funchal. The journey was uneventful, save for a brief encounter with a merchant ship whose crew spoke of strange lights near Black Reef. Upon arrival, we traveled to Ponta do Sol, a quaint village perched atop cliffs overlooking the Atlantic. The lighthouse keeper, an elderly man named Joaquim Silva, greeted us cautiously. "You're not the first to inquire about the Dolores," he said, leading us inside. A week ago, a man with a scar across his cheek asked the same. He left this behind. He handed Holmes a torn piece of parchment bearing coordinates and the phrase, "Beware the siren's call." Holmes examined it, another fragment of the map. We chartered a small fishing vessel to approach Black Reef. The jagged rocks jutted from the sea like skeletal fingers, waves crashing violently against them. Holmes pointed to a cove. There, a natural harbor, likely where the Dolores met her end. Diving into the clear waters, we discovered the remnants of a ship, barnacle-covered timbers and rusted cannons. Among the debris, Holmes retrieved a waterproof cylinder. Inside was a parchment, the final piece of the map. Back on the boat, we assembled the fragments. The complete map revealed a location inland, marked with the symbol of a wolf. Holmes smiled. The treasure was never at sea. Quintana hid it on land. Upon our return, we found Baker Street ransacked. Papers were strewn about, and the safe had been forced open. Lestrade arrived shortly after. We've had reports of similar break-ins, all targeting individuals connected to maritime history. Holmes clenched his fists. The Brotherhood grows desperate. He turned to me. "Watson, it's time we confront them directly." The ransacking of Baker Street had not been a mere act of vandalism. It was a warning. As Holmes knelt amidst the mess strewn across our sitting room, his expression grew as grave as I had ever seen it. "They were looking for the cipher," he said, "and though they found neither it nor the full map, they were dangerously close. Watson, we are no longer chasing shadows. The shadows are now chasing us." I glanced about the room, the shattered tea set, torn maps, overturned armchair, and felt a cold unease settle in my bones. What's our next move? Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he stood and walked over to the fireplace, his eyes fixed on the charred remnants of correspondence that had been saved from destruction. "The Brotherhood knew our movements. They struck while we were abroad," he said, half to himself. "There is a leak, either in the Foreign Office, the Admiralty, or perhaps within the Parliament itself." Before I could reply, a knock sounded at the door. Holmes motioned for silence. Drawing his revolver from his dressing gown, he gestured for me to stand behind the wall. He opened the door a crack. To our surprise, it was none other than Alastair Penhaligon, the Home Secretary's envoy, looking pale and winded. "Holmes, I had to come in person," he said, stepping quickly inside. "There's been an attempt on Lord Wexham's life, the Minister of Maritime Affairs. Someone pushed him from the Westminster embankment into the Thames this morning. He survived, barely." Holmes turned sharply. "An attempt? Was anything taken?" Penhaligon nodded grimly. "Yes, his briefcase. He had been reviewing classified colonial correspondence related to Portugal and Spain's naval routes in the 17th century, the same era as Don Quintana." "Then the Brotherhood is moving more boldly than I anticipated," Holmes said, pacing. "They are tying up loose ends and collecting their keys." Penhaligon handed Holmes a small folded paper. "This was found in Wexham's coat pocket. I thought you should see it." Holmes opened it and studied it carefully. His brow furrowed. Written in an elegant yet spidery hand, the message read, "To silence the truth, extinguish the torch. To find the truth, seek the tomb where no man speaks. 3 keys, 3 graves, 1 legacy." "What does it mean?" I asked, perplexed. "It is a riddle," Holmes replied, "and a death sentence." He placed the note carefully on the mantelpiece. "Watson, prepare your bag. We are going to the Bodleian." "The Bodleian Library?" "Yes," he said. "We require access to the De Saldanha Codex. It may contain the original maritime code used by Quintana's navigator and possibly references to the so-called city beneath, Enigmata." "You suspect Enigmata is more than a poetic flourish? I suspect it is a very real and very ancient location. A refuge, a vault, perhaps even a settlement lost to time, concealed deliberately." "What of the Brotherhood?" Penhaligon asked. Holmes's gaze hardened. "They will not rest until every obstacle is swept aside, but we must not let fear rule us." The next day we boarded a train to Oxford. The fog had lifted only slightly, and the countryside rolled past in a dull blur of greys and golds. Upon arrival, we made directly for the Bodleian, whose centuries-old stone facade looked all the more imposing in the autumn gloom. We were greeted by a man who introduced himself as Basil Yardley, keeper of the codices. He was thin, spectral, and wore a green velvet smoking jacket more befitting a drawing room than a research hall. "The De Saldanha Codex," he mused, leading us into the lower stacks. "A curious request. Very few know of its existence, and even fewer are permitted access." "Then we are most fortunate," Holmes replied. "Or," said Yardley, his eyes narrowing, "you are in danger." He led us through a wrought iron gate into the rare manuscripts room. From a locked cabinet, he removed a black leather-bound tome with silver clasps and placed it reverently on the table. Holmes opened the volume with great care, flipping past nautical tables, alchemical symbols, and hand-drawn maps that bled into one another like oil on parchment. "There," he said suddenly, pointing to a page adorned with an elaborate emblem. A wolf seated atop a trident, surrounded by 3 stars. "Same as the seal on the parchment fragment," I murmured. Holmes scanned the accompanying passage. "Listen to this. Enigmata, last harbor of the constellation, guarded by the circle of thorns, hidden beneath the chapel of St. Lazarus where no man prays." I looked to Holmes. "A chapel?" "In Madeira, perhaps," he replied. "There was a chapel of St. Lazarus constructed in the 17th century near the Pico do Inferno, abandoned after a landslide in 1723. "Where no man prays," I echoed. Holmes closed the codex and looked to Yardley. "Thank you, Mr. Yardley. You have been most helpful." Yardley gave a slight bow. "One final warning, Mr. Holmes. The Circle of Thorns was not merely a poetic invention. They were an offshoot of the Brotherhood, more ruthless, more occult. If Enigmata is real, they will kill to protect it." Holmes nodded. "And we will risk death to uncover it." We returned to London that evening to find a telegram waiting for us. From Red Fox. "Have the third key. Meet me at the old Limehouse dock. Midnight." "Another meeting," I said warily. "It could be a trap." "They are all traps," Holmes replied. "But this may be the last piece we need." At midnight, cloaked and armed, we made our way to Limehouse. The docks were nearly deserted, save for the faint clink of chains and the distant mewling of river gulls. The Red Fox waited beneath an old iron crane, his cloak pulled tightly about him. "You have it?" Holmes asked. Without a word, the Red Fox handed him a small iron medallion shaped like a sextant. Etched upon it were the words, "Sic itur ad astra." "Thus one travels to the stars," Holmes translated. "The final key." The Red Fox leaned in close. "You are being followed." He pointed across the quay, where the faint silhouette of a tall man stood in the fog, unmoving. "A brother?" "A hound," the fox said. "One of the circle." A shot rang out. We ducked behind a crate as a bullet struck the post near Holmes's head. The Red Fox drew a pistol and fired back, the figure vanishing into the mist. Moments later, silence returned. Holmes stood, brushing himself off. "Well, that certainly confirms we're on the right path." "Where to now?" I asked. Holmes looked out across the black water. "Madeira. The Chapel of St. Lazarus. The final riddle awaits, and with it, the truth." After the thunder of the gunshot and the smoke curled away into the oily black fog of Limehouse, we remained frozen behind the crate. Holmes crouched beside me with his revolver drawn, his breath sharp in the air. "I counted only one shooter," he whispered. "And the fox?" I asked, peering to where our mysterious contact had stood. "Gone." Vanished into the dark as if swallowed whole. Holmes rose slowly, every sense sharpened like a drawn blade. "He warned us, then disappeared. Intended or forced, I cannot be sure. But this confirms what I feared. We are not merely on the Brotherhood's trail, Watson. We are interwoven in their plans now. Whether as spoilers or pawns remains to be seen." We made our way back to Baker Street by a circuitous route, ensuring we were not followed. Holmes remained mostly silent, fingers drumming against his coat in thought. It was only once we returned to the hearth and stripped off our damp outer garments that he spoke again. "There's something about that medallion, Watson," he said, placing the iron sextant on the table beneath the lamplight. "A navigation device, yes, but a symbolic one as well." I examined the object, finely etched, with tiny celestial coordinates along the arc. A series of minute notches caught my attention. "These indentations," I said. "They seem precise." "Indeed, I believe they are meant to correspond with the map's final location," Holmes replied. "But not to mark land or sea. Rather, something beneath. A structure, possibly. A hidden vault." At that, Holmes stood abruptly and crossed to his writing desk. From a locked drawer, he removed the 3 fragments of the pirate map, now securely reassembled and mounted on tracing paper. He aligned the medallion above the central compass rose, and something remarkable happened. A tiny pin hidden in the medallion's reverse caught the light, casting a precise point of shadow over the island of Madeira. "There," Holmes whispered. "Do you see it?" "A point inland," I said, "on the southern slope near Pico do Inferno." Holmes nodded, his voice taking on that familiar tone of calm certainty. "The Chapel of St. Lazarus. Abandoned, sunken into the mountain, its records expunged from most ledgers. But here, hidden in cipher and metal, the truth endures." Suddenly, the door to the sitting room opened. Lestrade stood there, rain streaming from his bowler and an expression of grim urgency etched across his features. "I came as soon as I received the message," he said. "A man's body's been found in the Limehouse Canal, strangled. A wax seal was pushed into his mouth." Holmes reached for his coat. "The Brotherhood again!" Lestrade held up a sealed envelope. "There's more. This was delivered to Scotland Yard, addressed to you." Holmes opened the envelope with a small blade. Inside was a single card, heavy and perfumed faintly with salt water and lavender. It read, "The Circle watches. The wolf returns to his den. Follow, and you will find your tomb." Beneath the message was a crude ink drawing, 3 stars forming a triangle around a skull. Holmes pocketed the note. A warning. perhaps even a threat, but more importantly, an admission. They know we are close, which means they are closer still. Lestrade, who had taken a seat, lit one of Holmes's spare cigarettes and gave a long sigh. Holmes, I've dealt with blackmailers, murderers, even anarchists. But these devils? It's as if they operate beneath the rules of society itself. That's precisely the point, Holmes replied. They believe themselves ordained by legacy, an invisible lineage of greed, death, and preservation of power. We will strip them bare, Lestrade, but we must proceed to Madeira immediately. Lestrade stood. If you need men. No, Holmes interrupted. The fewer who know, the safer they remain. Watson and I will go alone. The final cipher lies where the sea meets the bones of a fallen chapel. 2 days later, after swift and clandestine arrangements, Holmes and I disembarked once again upon the jagged cliffs of Madeira. Our destination, the Pico do Inferno, and the ruins of the forgotten chapel of St. Lazarus. The trail was steep, winding through groves of eucalyptus and stone, long reclaimed by nature. Local guides refused to accompany us beyond a certain bend, murmuring of curses and sightings of lights at night, blue lanterns drifting in the mist. By twilight, we reached the plateau. There, half buried by a collapsed hillside, stood what remained of the chapel, just a scorched archway, 2 crumbled buttresses, and beneath it, a staircase descending into darkness. Holmes lit a lantern and motioned for silence. We descended. The air grew colder. The smell, salt, damp stone, and something ancient, filled our nostrils. At the bottom lay a narrow passage lined with statuary. Angels with blindfolded eyes, saints with mouths sewn shut. The artistry was exquisite and terrifying. We reached a sealed stone door, upon which was etched the same emblem as the medallion, the wolf upon the trident, encircled by stars. Holmes stepped forward and placed the medallion into a shallow depression in the door's surface. With a hiss of ancient gears, the mechanism clicked. The door slid open with a groan. What lay beyond made even Holmes pause in awe. A vaulted chamber, carved directly into the mountain. The walls were lined with mosaics, depictions of the sea, pirate fleets, storms, and at the center, a map of the world as it was imagined in the 1600s. At the base of this mosaic stood a marble pedestal. Upon it, a chest, iron-bound, locked with 3 devices. Holmes stepped forward, drawing the 3 keys we had obtained, the cipher from Stowe's study, the parchment tube from Black Reef, and the medallion sextant. One by one, he fit each into its mechanism. The final lock opened with a deep clunk. He lifted the lid. Inside were scrolls, dozens, possibly hundreds, charts, letters, and volumes bound in cracked vellum. On the top, a single sheet of aged paper bearing the symbol of the Brotherhood and the words, "The true legacy of Don Salvador Quintana," to be read only by the heir to the wolf. Holmes reached in, and from the depths of the chest drew a locket. He opened it. Inside, a miniature portrait of a child, dark-haired, olive-skinned, and on the reverse, the inscription, "To my son. May you restore what I could not, SQ." Holmes's expression turned grim. Watson, this wasn't about gold. It was about blood, a lineage hidden for centuries. Don Quintana had a child, perhaps born in England, and someone today believes they are the rightful heir. I looked around the tomb. And the Brotherhood seek to preserve that lineage, or to extinguish it. We closed the chest. The air in the chamber seemed to grow heavier, as if the weight of the truth pressed upon us. "This is no longer a simple treasure hunt," Holmes said. "This is a war of inheritance, and someone in Parliament, perhaps even Stowe himself, believes they are the wolf reborn." We sealed the chamber behind us and made our way back to the world above, but we were no longer alone. Above us, on the ridge, stood a man in a black coat, his face hidden beneath the brim of a tricorn hat. As we emerged, he turned and disappeared into the forest. The circle had found us, and the hunt had only just begun. Chapter 3. The Parliamentarian's Veil. It was in the dim half-light of a London morning that Holmes and I returned from Madeira, both altered by what we had witnessed beneath the ruined chapel of St. Lazarus. Though Holmes's stride retained its usual economy of motion, I could see that the lines at the corners of his eyes had deepened. His face leaner than before, less with fatigue than with the pressure of revelation. The chest remained concealed within a false-bottomed trunk, now securely in our possession, its contents known only to us and, presumably, to those few among the Brotherhood who had survived long enough to remember. We had scarcely removed our coats upon entering 221B Baker Street when Mrs. Hudson appeared with a telegram. Holmes opened it, read it, then handed it silently to me. It read, "Urgent. Must speak in person. Parliament is compromised. Come discreetly. A. Penhaligon." "A trap?" I asked. Holmes merely smiled. "Perhaps, but an intriguing one." We made our way to Westminster under cover of darkness. Though it was still early, the Palace of Westminster loomed with an oppressive air. The gas lamps burned low and flickering now, casting long shadows across the pavement where only the silhouettes of hansom cabs and the distant cry of paper boys broke the uneasy silence. Penhaligon met us in an antechamber beneath the House of Lords, a small stone-walled office used, he said, for unofficial consultations. He looked paler than before, the veins at his temple drawn tight with anxiety. "I have little time," he began. "They are watching me now. I cannot speak openly." Holmes sat across from him, folding his gloved hands over his knee. "Then let us speak in code, Mr. Penhaligon. What is the cipher today?" Penhaligon hesitated, then nodded. "We believe that 3 members of Parliament, possibly more, are agents of the Brotherhood. One of them is almost certainly Lord Desmond Crowthorne." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "The former ambassador to Lisbon?" "The very same," Penhaligon replied. "And he was the one who insisted on reopening colonial maritime archives last year. He had full access to the naval dispatches concerning the Iberian expeditions and salvage records of the 17th century fleets." Watson interjected. "Are you suggesting that Crowthorne is the heir?" "No," Penhaligon said. "He believes himself the guardian of the heir. But we don't know who the heir is." Holmes gave a dry smile. "You have been careful, Mr. Penhaligon, but you missed one detail." He removed the miniature portrait from his pocket, which we had recovered from the tomb beneath St. Lazarus. Penhaligon leaned forward, stunned. "This was recovered from the vault in Madeira," Holmes explained. "The child depicted here is no mere symbolic heir. He, or rather his descendant, walks among us now." "You have a name?" Penhaligon whispered. "Not yet, but we will soon." He nodded grimly. "Be careful. Crowthorne has powerful allies. One of them is Colonel Hadrian Vale, retired intelligence, now special advisor to the Colonial Office. Vale has disappeared. Off the grid, as they say, but rumor places him in contact with elements in the East End." Holmes's expression darkened. "Then the circle has entered London." "More than that," Penhaligon said, standing now. "They are preparing something. There is to be a vote in 3 days, a reassignment of overseas assets and lands once held under Spanish charter. Should it pass, several Brotherhood members stand to gain titles and deed to forgotten colonies, especially in the Caribbean." Holmes stood too. "They're not just protecting a legacy, they are reclaiming an empire." Penhaligon nodded gravely. "We're too few to stop it from within, but if you find the heir, find the one to whom Quintana passed his legacy, you may have a legal and moral instrument to halt the Brotherhood's rise." Holmes extended his hand. "Then we begin at once." Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread out several documents across the carpet. Records from the vault, portraits, letters, church registries, and a handful of old immigration logs. "We are looking," he said, "for a single bloodline that began in 1685, one that traversed from Portugal or Spain to London, likely under duress, secrecy, or foreign patronage. I examined a baptismal record. Here, Salvador Joseph Quint, born 1702, mother listed as Isidora Alvarez Quintana, location Shoreditch." Holmes's eyes lit with fire. "A codified name. Quintana becomes Quint. That, Watson, is our thread." For the next 12 hours, we followed the thread through London's dark archives, births, deaths, marriages, business charters, until we reached a name. Sebastian Quint, a solicitor's clerk turned private antiquarian. Born 1859. Address, 7 Morgan Lane, Wapping. Holmes donned his coat with the speed of a man possessed. "Come, Watson, we must find Mr. Sebastian Quint before the Brotherhood does." Wapping, as ever, bore the scent of brine, salt, coal smoke, and rust. The Thames lapped at the embankment like a creature breathing in its sleep. We found Morgan Lane just before dusk. Number 7 was a narrow brick house with faded green shutters and an iron bell pull. Holmes knocked thrice. A moment passed. Then a voice from inside. "Go away. I have nothing worth taking." Holmes called through the door. "We seek not to take Mr. Quint. We come with answers to your questions and a warning. Open the door if you value your life." There was a pause. Then the bolt slid back. A pale man in his 40s, spectacles round and smeared, peered at us with sunken eyes. His hair was untidy, his fingers ink-stained. "You've brought the medallion," he said, barely above a whisper. "I've dreamed of it." "Your dreams were true," Holmes replied. "May we come in?" The interior of the house was lined wall to wall with maps, books, and sketches of ships. Candles flickered against the gloom. Quint led us to a back room, half library, half sanctuary. "I know who I am," he said. "At least I suspected. My grandmother told me stories of a shipwreck, of treasure, and of wolves who would come for it." Holmes handed him the locket. Quint wept. "This was hers," he said. "She wore it every Sunday. Said it belonged to her great-great-grandfather, a man of the sea." Watson said gently, "Do you understand what this means, Mr. Quint?" "I do," he said, "and I wish I did not. I never asked for this." Holmes's voice was gentle but firm. "Nevertheless, it is yours, and now others will come. They will try to erase your name from history, but with you we can bring down the circle." Suddenly, shattering glass, a window exploded inward. A canister rolled across the floor, spewing thick, acrid smoke. "Down!" Holmes cried, pulling me behind the table as masked men in dark coats burst into the room. I drew my revolver, firing twice. One man fell. Quint screamed, covering the locket with his body. Holmes swept the medallion from the table and shoved it into my coat. "We go now!" he shouted. We leapt through the back window into the alley beyond, the night alive with shouts, gunshots, and the ring of iron on cobblestone. Holmes led us through the warren of whopping alleys, never pausing until we emerged into open street and hailed a passing cab. Inside, panting, Holmes turned to me. "They know who he is, Watson." "And they'll keep coming," I said. Holmes stared out the cab window as we rolled into the fog. "Then we must finish this," he murmured, "before the Brotherhood finishes us." The hansom cab carried us swiftly from the burning shadows of Wapping through the fog-choked arteries of the city. Sebastian Quint sat opposite me, pale as wax and trembling uncontrollably, clutching the ancient locket to his breast, as if it alone kept him tethered to sanity. Holmes, silent for several minutes, peered through the cracked shutter as the cobbled streets gave way to wider avenues. "Is there somewhere we may take you that is safe?" I asked Quint gently. "No place is safe," he muttered. "Not if they know." Holmes finally spoke. "They do know. But you are not powerless, Mr. Quint. You possess something they cannot claim. Your name, the legitimacy of your bloodline." "I'm a bookseller," Quint replied bitterly. "An amateur historian. I never wanted a legacy." "That is precisely why you are worthy of it," Holmes said. "But if we are to keep you alive, we must act quickly." We reached Baker Street well past midnight. Holmes secured all the shutters, checked the window locks, and then retrieved a small key from beneath the floorboard. With it, he opened the door to our seldom-used cellar, a reinforced room, once part of the original Georgian foundation, which Holmes had long kept prepared for emergencies. "You'll remain here for the time being," Holmes said. "We'll bring you food and clothing. No one will know you're here. The Brotherhood will presume we have separated." Quint nodded silently, descending into the darkness. When the trapdoor was closed and bolted, Holmes returned to the sitting room and poured a small brandy for each of us. The fire crackled weakly in the grate as I looked over to him. "You believe they'll attempt something at the vote?" I said. Holmes nodded. "More than attempt. They will use it to shift power, legalize their access to territories, and above all, erase any evidence of their manipulation. We must expose them before that." "How?" Holmes reached into the satchel that had returned with us from Madeira and produced a bundle of faded documents, the ones taken from Don Salvador Quintana's vault. "By using their own words against them," he said. He spread the pages before us. There were letters signed with familiar names, ones now held by members of Parliament. There were ledgers that connected Crowthorne, Vell, and others to the same shipping concerns linked to the now defunct Venturo Trading Company, a known Brotherhood front, presumed dissolved since the 1840s. But the evidence suggested it never ceased operations. It had merely changed names. "Look at this," Holmes said, passing me a document sealed in wax. A private memorandum from 1863, addressed to the Triumvirate, detailing the transfer of funds to an offshore account in Tortola. And here, see the seal? The 3 stars and skull, the Brotherhood's original insignia. A chain of corruption that stretches a century, I whispered. Holmes looked over his steepled fingers. We must do what the Crown cannot. Indict men of privilege with truth. But we cannot use these papers directly. If they vanish into official channels, they'll be discredited. Or worse, suppressed. Then what do we do? Holmes's eyes glittered. We turn to someone incorruptible. The next morning, after a brief rest and a breakfast eaten mostly in silence, Holmes sent me to call upon Lady Ava Gresham, an investigative journalist of the old sort, a woman of fire and steel, who had once exposed a colonial embezzlement ring at great personal cost. We met her in a private tea room near Fleet Street. Tall, sharp-eyed, and dressed in a tailored violet coat, Lady Gresham greeted Holmes with a smirk and a firm handshake. "If you're calling on me," she said, "London's under siege." "Quite right," Holmes said, "but this time the enemy wears the robes of government." He laid the documents before her. As she read, her expression changed from amusement to horror to a grim, determined focus. "Dear God," she whispered, "these are the names of half the Colonial Affairs Committee. Soon to be lords of forgotten treasure and unknown islands, unless we act." She looked up. "I'll write the story, but it must run as I see fit. Full names, no aliases, no coy sources close to the investigation. We print it clean, or we don't print it at all." "Then you shall have everything," Holmes said, "but you must wait until after the vote. If you publish beforehand, they'll bury it." "After?" "Because we will bait them into exposing themselves first." That night, Holmes and I traveled to one of the Brotherhood's suspected safe houses, an abandoned warehouse on Ratcliffe Highway. Holmes had traced communications there through a false telegraph relay. We entered through a collapsed wall, careful to step over broken beams and rusted nails. Inside, by the faint glow of our lanterns, we found maps pinned to the walls, routes of old Spanish galleons, coded shipping logs, and a list of names. Names crossed out, including Penhaligon's. And ours. "Watson," Holmes said quietly, "we've little time left." Suddenly, we heard voices, low, speaking in Spanish. Holmes motioned for silence, and we slipped behind a crate. Through a crack, we saw two men, both dressed in dark uniforms of military cut. One held a letter. "It is to be delivered to Lord Crowthorne himself," said the first in heavily accented English. "Tonight." "And the vote?" asked the second. "Tomorrow at noon. Once passed, we sail. All is prepared." The men exited through a rear door. Holmes turned to me. "We intercept that message. And then we go to Parliament." The following morning, beneath the marbled colonnades of Westminster, Holmes and I entered the public gallery as the session was called to order. Around us, the assembled lords and MPs murmured with anticipation. At the center, Lord Crowthorne took the floor. "The bill before us," he said, "seeks to repatriate colonial land rights long thought abandoned. But they were not lost. They were merely awaiting rediscovery." Holmes turned to me, slipping something into my coat pocket. "Be ready," he said. "At the moment I signal, stand and speak." I froze. "Holmes?" But he was already gone, sliding into the hall below through a side stair he had scouted weeks earlier. As Crowthorne began to read the final clause, the chamber doors burst open. "Stop the proceedings!" Holmes's voice rang through the vaulted chamber. He held aloft a scroll, the final message from the Brotherhood's courier, and beside him, Lady Ava Gresham, followed by two constables and a clerk from the Admiralty office. "Lord Desmond Crowthorne," Holmes said loudly, "you stand accused of conspiracy, corruption, and treason against the Crown." The room erupted in chaos. I stood as ordered and spoke. "I am Dr. John H. Watson," I declared, "and I bear sworn testimony from the last living heir of Don Salvador Quintana. The lands you seek to seize belong, by blood and deed, to him." Holmes pointed toward the gallery. Sebastian Quint stepped into the light, flanked by guards. The color drained from Crowthorne's face. "Arrest that man!" one of the constables shouted. But Crowthorne drew a pistol. A scream. 2 shots rang out. I saw Holmes move, fast as lightning, tackling Quint to the ground. A 3rd shot cracked the air, and Crowthorne fell, struck in the chest by a constable's revolver. Silence followed, and then the sound of rustling papers as the Clerk of the Commons stepped forward and quietly removed the bill from the docket. The vote was never cast. Later that evening, as the fires of scandal spread through London's newspapers, Holmes and I sat once more before the hearth of 221B. The medallion and locket lay upon the mantel. "The Brotherhood?" I asked. "Wounded, not destroyed," Holmes replied. But now they will scatter, their names known, their legacy challenged. And Quint, Holmes smiled faintly. He returns to his books, but now he will live as a man with history behind him and none in pursuit. I raised a glass of brandy. To the fall of the circle. Holmes clinked my glass with his. And to the truth, long buried, but never dead. Chapter 4. The Alchemist Below Whitechapel. The days that followed the explosive revelations in Westminster were as turbulent as any London had known in recent years. Newspapers ran daily stories, each more lurid than the last, bearing headlines like the pirate heir in Parliament and the cursed legacy of the Quintana line. The reputations of Crowthorne and his allies were eviscerated in the court of public opinion long before formal proceedings could commence. Arrests were issued, resignations accepted, and secrets long buried were finally brought to daylight. Yet even in triumph, Holmes was restless. He paced the length of our study like a caged panther, brow furrowed, fingers steepled against his lips. They were prepared to sacrifice Crowthorne, he said on the third day, halting before the fire. That much is now clear. He was a figurehead. Valuable but expendable. The true architects remain. You mean the triumvirate mentioned in the Madeira documents? Holmes nodded slowly. Precisely. The circle has many names for itself, depending on which continent it operates in. In London, it seems, they have chosen an older title. He withdrew a vellum folio from the Baker Street files, notes, sketches, and records drawn from the Brotherhood's safe house in Ratcliffe. The triumvirate, he continued, is no symbolic term. It refers to 3 living men. And now, I believe I have found the second. I leaned forward. Who? Father Gideon Flax. I blinked. A priest? Holmes gave a dark smile. In name only. The man wears a cassock but walks like a soldier. Formerly of the Royal Engineers, discharged under ambiguous circumstances in 1868. Since then, he has resurfaced repeatedly under aliases, Dr. Gideon, Brother Flint, even the alchemist in some underworld accounts, always near sites of excavation, cryptography, or forgotten catacombs. He tapped a newspaper clipping. And now he resides in Whitechapel, beneath the facade of a disused chapel on Candlewick Lane. Surely not the same Candlewick Chapel that was closed after the cholera outbreak? Holmes nodded. The very one. Sealed officially in 1872. Yet lights are seen there at odd hours, workmen come and go, and I have reason to believe it connects to one of London's oldest subterranean networks, the Roman vaults beneath Aldgate. My stomach turned. What would he want with those? Holmes turned his gaze toward the fire. Legends speak of a codex, written by Quintana's confessor, Brother Thomas de Jerez, just before his death in 1690. It was said to contain the master cipher, the full map, and instructions for unsealing what Quintana called the gate below the sea. If such a codex survived, and if it was brought to London, then it would still lie beneath the earth. Precisely. That evening, cloaked against the wind and the damp, Holmes and I made our way to the eastern edge of Whitechapel. The moon hung low behind a shroud of fog, and the alleys whispered with footsteps of unseen men. Candlewick Lane was half forgotten, a narrow passage between tenement rows, strewn with refuse and puddled rainwater. The chapel stood like a corpse left standing, boarded windows, soot-darkened brick, and a collapsed steeple leaning like a broken mast. Holmes removed a thin chisel from his coat and wedged it beneath one of the boards. We slipped inside. The air was thick with rot and the faintest scent of chemicals, phosphorus, perhaps, or something more ancient. Our lantern cast long shadows along the nave, revealing that the pews had been replaced by tables, wires, and cryptographic equipment. Along one wall, strange symbols had been painted, circular arrangements of letters, overlapping triangles, and the sigil of the Brotherhood carved directly into the altar stone. Beneath the altar lay a trapdoor. Holmes paused only a moment before opening it. We descended a stone stair, spiraling downward into blackness. The catacombs were impossibly old. Roman brickwork gave way to Saxon passages, and then to medieval additions carved in crude blocks. Our lanterns revealed dry bones, collapsed pillars, and the remnants of ancient religious icons long since defaced. Every few yards, Holmes marked our path with chalk. I believe Flax is searching for the codex, he whispered, but he has yet to find it. We may be able to retrieve it first. After nearly an hour of silent progress, we came to a fork. To the left, the passage narrowed into darkness. To the right, the scent of sulfur. Holmes hesitated, then led us right. Moments later, we reached a cavernous chamber lit by a strange phosphorescent glow. Within stood a massive mechanism. Gears, wheels, and steel rods, clearly modern, built into the ancient space. At its center stood a tall man in priest's robes, hair white as ash, face hawk-like and cruel. His back was turned as he adjusted one of the devices. Father Gideon Flax. Holmes held a finger to his lips, and we moved behind one of the support columns. We watched as Flax retrieved a small brass object from a lead-lined box, a compass, or more accurately, a modified astrolabe. "The gate opens," Flax muttered. "We have the sequence. One last cipher remains. Then Quint's descendant becomes irrelevant." Holmes turned to me. "He knows." "We're too late." "No," I whispered. "We're here now." Suddenly a boot scraped stone behind us. A guard, silent, masked, and armed. I turned, raising my revolver, but it was too late. The man struck me in the temple, and I fell. When I awoke, I was bound to a rusted iron chair beside Holmes, who appeared more annoyed than alarmed. Father Flax stood before us, his robes spattered with grease and ink. "Well, Mr. Holmes," he said softly, "we meet at last." Holmes regarded him coldly. "Your reputation is greatly exaggerated, Flax. The Brotherhood treats you as a prophet." "I am merely a servant," Flax said, "to a cause older than England. The legacy of Quintana was not to be wasted on weaklings. It was to be transformed." He held up the astrolabe. "This device, Mr. Holmes, was crafted in Cadiz in 1603. It responds not only to the stars, but to the ley lines beneath the earth. Quintana knew this. His codex was the key." "And you think it lies beneath London," Holmes said. "I know it does," Flax answered, "and I am close." He leaned forward, his breath acrid with laudanum. "You have the air. Give him to me, or you both die down here." Holmes only smiled. "Then I'm afraid you'll be very disappointed." With that, a sharp bang echoed down the tunnel. Gunfire. Another shout. Holmes leaned toward me. I called in reinforcements. Just before we entered the chapel, I stared. "You knew this would happen?" "I suspected." A moment later, two figures burst into the chamber, Lestrade and Sergeant Cormac, revolvers drawn. "Drop it," Lestrade shouted. Flax turned, raising a vial of blue liquid, but Lestrade fired first. The vial shattered in Flax's hand. He screamed and collapsed, the chemical hissing as it burned his skin. Holmes surged forward, kicking the astrolabe away as Cormac rushed to unbind us. "You're late," Holmes said to Lestrade. Lestrade grinned. "You're welcome." Hours later, above ground, we watched as Metropolitan Police sealed off the chapel. Flax had survived, though barely. He would be held under military custody. The Brotherhood's apparatus in London was now crippled, its vaults dismantled, its members known, its agents under surveillance. Holmes remained subdued. "It's not over," he said as dawn broke over the rooftops. "The codex still lies hidden. We have struck the snake's head, but not its heart." "And the third member of the triumvirate?" I asked. Holmes looked eastward. "There is one name that recurs in the maritime records, one that even Quintana feared." "Who?" Holmes's voice was a whisper. "Admiral Rooke." We returned to Baker Street just before noon, both of us thoroughly exhausted. Holmes collapsed into his armchair without removing his coat, his eyes fixed on a single spot of soot-blackened ceiling above the hearth. I said little, knowing better than to disturb his thoughts while they were arranging themselves. The morning's events had ended in success, perhaps, but the deeper implications of Flax's underground machine, of the ancient codex he sought, of the name Rooke, hung over the room like a choking fog. After some time, I ventured, "Holmes, if Flax was only the second in the triumvirate, what do we know of the third?" Holmes's hand moved slowly to his breast pocket. From it, he withdrew a scrap of oilskin paper we had found in Flax's effects, seemingly just a ship's log fragment, but Holmes had studied it all morning. "The handwriting is distinctive," he said. "Note the angularity of the capital F, unmistakable to those of us who studied naval cartography during the Afghan campaign. This," he passed me the sheet, "is the signature of Rear Admiral Elias Rooke." I scanned the page. The ink was faded, but beneath a tangle of weathered lines and bearings, I made out coordinates. 53° 34 N 06E. Holmes was already consulting an atlas. "That is a position on the Humber estuary," he said, "not far from Spurn Point. A lonely spit of land, heavily eroded, but once home to smuggling rings, wartime bunkers, and, during the early 18th century, a signal station used by the Royal Navy to monitor foreign ships off the coast. The gate below the sea? I asked. He turned slowly. Possibly. But Rook? What connection does he have to Quintana's legacy? Holmes picked up another file and flipped it open to a yellowed pamphlet published by the Royal Maritime Archives. Admiral Rook commanded Her Majesty's private anti-piracy fleet in the West Indies, he said. A war hero, some called him, but one with a peculiar obsession. He never destroyed the ships he captured. He had them dismantled, plank by plank, and their figureheads shipped to a personal collection. What purpose? Holmes looked up sharply. Watson, do you recall the Brotherhood's use of symbolic encryption? Keys hidden in sculpture, compasses beneath sundials? I nodded. Well, he said, Rook was not merely collecting war trophies. He was gathering pieces of a map. It was not long before Holmes had secured a train to Hull, leaving Lestrade and Scotland Yard to deal with the wreckage of Flax's underground lair. Our destination, the bleak coastline near Spurn Point, where sandstorms, tides, and wrecked hulls bore silent witness to centuries of maritime secrecy. As the train thundered across the countryside, Holmes remained silent, staring out the window as the green fields gave way to fog-licked moors. Occasionally, he made a note or studied an old naval map retrieved from the Royal Archives. When we arrived in Hull, the smell of salt and coal smoke greeted us like an old, weary dog. We made arrangements to hire a local guide, an aging sailor named Ewan Coster, who claimed to know every inlet, cave, and rocky outcrop from Withersea to Grimsby. Spurn Point, he muttered when Holmes showed him the coordinates. You'll find little there but wind and ghosts, sir. Whole pieces of the coast have dropped into the sea. Perfect, Holmes murmured. Exactly the kind of place a man like Rook would use to hide a secret. We departed at dawn the following day, aboard a small trawler piloted by Coster himself. The North Sea rolled with icy menace, the sky choked with mist, and gulls screamed overhead like the souls of drowned men. By noon, we reached Spurn Point. It was a narrow peninsula, curved like a shepherd's crook and scarcely wider than a carriage road in some places. Crumbling bunkers littered the dunes. Beyond them, the wind howled through the rusted skeletons of radio towers and old Navy signal posts. Here, Coster said, bringing us to the western shore. Best come ashore, for the tide cuts us off. She comes in quick here, fast as a whip. We disembarked, boots crunching wet sand and salt-bleached driftwood. Holmes consulted the coordinates. Just inland, perhaps 40 yards. We crossed a narrow strip of dunes and came to a marshy depression, a shallow crater, filled in places with seagrass and fragments of brick. At its center stood a collapsed stone structure, perhaps the remnants of a tower or gunpost. Holmes knelt and scraped away at a moss-covered slab. Symbols emerged, concentric rings, weathered but legible, interspersed with points marked by initials, Q, R, and an unfamiliar third, M. A triangulation pattern, Holmes muttered. Quintana, Rook, and someone else. He stood, eyes blazing. Watson, help me clear this. We pried the slab open to reveal a narrow shaft descending into darkness. Another vault? I said. No, Holmes replied. A tomb. He produced a rope ladder from Coster's pack, fixed it to a remaining steel pin, and began his descent. The chamber beneath was small, circular, and dry, protected by the elevation above the tidal line. Within, the walls were lined with sealed crates marked with a crest, an owl clutching a serpent, and on a stone pedestal lay a single object, a bound volume of leather, sealed with wax and adorned with golden clasps. The Codex. Holmes approached it reverently, his fingers trembling for the first time since Madeira. He broke the seal. Inside were diagrams, astronomical calculations, cipher wheels, and at the center, a fold-out map of the Atlantic seafloor. A route was marked, from the Canaries to the Sargasso Sea, and a final resting place, ringed with symbols. I stared. It exists. Holmes closed the book. Yes, he whispered, and others know. Suddenly, footsteps above, shouts, gunfire. Holmes grabbed the codex. Up, quickly! We climbed in silence, each heartbeat echoing like thunder. As we emerged into the waning light, we saw a figure fleeing across the dunes, a long coat flapping, a glint of silver at the belt. A bullet tore through Holmes's sleeve. We ducked, returning fire, but the figure vanished into the marsh. Coster ran toward us. Another ship offshore! He yelled. They landed a skiff. More coming. Holmes didn't hesitate. Back to the boat. Now. We reached the trawler under a hail of gunfire, ducking behind crates and fishing gear as Coster pushed off. In the distance, a black ship loomed, silent, without flags, without lights. Holmes watched it vanish into the mist. "The third member of the triumvirate," I said. He nodded grimly. "Rook still lives." Chapter 5. The Man with the Tide Glass. The wind off the North Sea battered the walls of our modest lodging in Hull with the fury of Poseidon himself. Rain swept across the windows in sheets as if the heavens had taken offense at the unsealing of the codex. In the flickering light of our oil lamp, Holmes stood over the leather-bound tome we had retrieved from the tomb beneath Spurn Point. His fingers moved with almost religious reverence over the pages, seamlessly translated between ancient Castilian, Latin, and the intricate symbology Quintana's confessor, Brother Tomas de Jerez, had constructed. There was no doubt now. The codex was real, and its implications threatened to unravel empires. But it was not the book alone that troubled Holmes. It was the ship we had seen, the silent vessel lying beyond the mists, its black hull swaying like a shadow in the waves. Holmes believed it to be the Tide Glass. "That ship has no registry," he muttered, not for the first time. "No official records, yet it is seen where catastrophe follows. Reports place it near Cartagena during the 1873 uprising. Again near the Solomon Isles during the German annexation, and now here, near Spurn Point." I was seated beside the hearth, drying my boots. "You think it belongs to Rook?" "I believe it is Rook," Holmes said, his voice low and flat. We departed Hull 2 days later, escorted under protection. Lestrade had dispatched a discreet detachment from the yard to secure the codex and deliver it to Mycroft Holmes for duplication. Meanwhile, Holmes had other plans. "We need to find the Tide Glass," he said, "and to do so, we must track its prey." We took rail south to Portsmouth, where the Royal Naval Archives housed decades of shipping reports, contraband records, and pirate interdiction charts. Upon arrival, Holmes insisted we meet with Rear Admiral Jeremiah Croft, retired, crusty, but a loyalist to the Crown, and one of the few living officers who had once served under Elias Rooke. Rooke was no ordinary officer, Croft grunted, sipping brandy beneath a portrait of Trafalgar. He had the sea in his bones and the devil in his eyes, promoted faster than any man I ever saw, but he went strange after 67. "What happened in 67? Holmes asked. Croft peered at him over the rim of his glass. "He took a private commission, an unofficial expedition to the Outer Banks, claimed he was chasing a Spanish gold phantom that had been haunting Caribbean routes since the Treaty of Utrecht." He leaned closer. "Rooke didn't return for 2 years. When he did, he'd changed. He walked with a limp, never spoke of what happened, just kept saying he'd found the blood of Quintana." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Was there a crew?" "Once. And?" Croft's face darkened. "He came back alone." That night, back in our quarters near the Portsmouth docks, Holmes laid a chart across our table. He drew lines from Spurn Point to points on the high seas, junctions where sightings of the Tide Glass had coincided with disappearances, sinkings, or encrypted broadcasts intercepted by British intelligence. "The vessel's movements," he said, "correspond to one constant, the lunar cycle. Every 28 days it makes port somewhere, then disappears." "Port?" I said. "Where? The ship has no flag." "Because it does not dock where flags are flown," he answered. "It anchors in forgotten harbors, natural inlets, pirate coves, sea caves, hidden from satellite or surveillance." He stabbed a finger onto the coast of Brittany. "There. Belle Ile en Mer, an island off the French coast, used by smugglers since the 1600s, and most importantly, mentioned in the Codex." I raised an eyebrow. "You think the Codex and Rooke's location are connected?" Holmes rolled the sleeve of his shirt to reveal a scarred map of lines and sigils drawn in ink across his forearm. "They're inseparable." The crossing to Belle Ile was rough. Our boat, a cutter manned by a taciturn Breton named Remy Jouvet, creaked against a northward swell. The sky hung low, slate-colored and cold. We passed the Ile de Groix by dawn and reached Belle Ile's western cliffs as the sun broke through the clouds. Remy said little but pointed toward the crags. "There," he said, "Crique de Vieux Roi, Old King's Cove, no port, just water and stone." We climbed the slippery incline in silence. Holmes moved with unsettling precision, using the Codex's coordinates and aligning constellations visible even in early day to triangulate our path. After nearly an hour's hike, we came to a hidden cleft in the cliffside. Holmes raised his spyglass. Beyond the rocks, the tide glass. She was moored in still waters, blacker than pitch, her masts skeletal against the dawn. "I knew it," Holmes whispered. Suddenly, a flintlock hammer clicked behind us. "Step away from the edge," said a low voice, English, but with a rasp like sand over bone. We turned. A tall man in naval garb stood behind us. Coal-black coat, epaulets long rusted, his eyes shaded by a tricorn hat. His beard was streaked with silver, his right hand gloved in cracked leather. "Sherlock Holmes," the man said. "I presume," Holmes answered coldly. "Admiral Elias Rook." The man smiled. We were escorted, uncuffed but watched, aboard the Tide Glass. The ship was unlike any I had seen. A floating museum of horrors and grandeur. Cannonades engraved with names of old Spanish galleons, hallways lit by phosphor lanterns, and a deck carved with runes and Latin invocations. Rook led us below. "You found the codex," he said, unhurried, as we descended into a chamber that smelled of cedar, brine, and death. Holmes did not answer. "I have waited 20 years for that book." Flax was weak. He built machines and wanted faith. "But I?" He turned, his eyes shining. "I want the treasure." Holmes met his gaze. "You believe it is gold?" "I know it is not just gold. It is something deeper, something hidden in the wreck of the San Telmo, buried beneath the reefs of the Sargasso. Quintana's priests wrote of it, a heart forged of coral and blood." "A metaphor," Holmes said dryly. "No," Rook replied. "A beacon." He stepped closer. "Give me the codex, and I will give you your lives." "You assume," Holmes said softly, "that we brought it aboard." Rook's eyes flared. In an instant, the illusion broke. He signaled to his men. Swords were drawn. Holmes and I were seized, searched, and beaten. The codex was not found. We were chained in the brig overnight. Holmes, ever unfazed, had managed to conceal a shard of steel within the lining of his boot. By dawn, he had freed us both. "We cannot leave without proof," he whispered, "but we can destroy his plans." We crept through the ship, sabotaging the signal mast, severing wires, and planting Holmes's last reserve of fulminate of mercury along the rudder assembly. Just before dawn, we leapt from the starboard hull into the icy channel. Ramey awaited us in silence. Behind us, a muffled roar echoed over the sea. Smoke plumed. The Tide Glass, crippled, but not sunk. Not yet. We returned to London that week, bruised, soaked, and victorious in appearance, but the hunt had only deepened. Holmes stood at our window as the sun rose over Baker Street. "Rook will come again," he said. "He will follow the codex's trail." "And what will we do?" Holmes turned, eyes aglow. "We will sail to the grave of the San Telmo." The next morning, I found Holmes already awake, seated at our Baker Street breakfast table. His violin rested untouched beside his tea. Before him lay a detailed navigational chart, ink freshly drawn between red pins that marked the vast triangle of ocean known to seafarers as the Dead Man's Sea, the heart of the Sargasso. Without looking up, he said, "I've confirmed it, Watson. The final coordinates are inscribed in 2 layers, one hidden within the codex's lunar cipher, and the second embedded in the concentric rings we found on the tomb slab beneath Spurn Point." I leaned in, eyes tracing the longitude and latitude. "You believe the wreck of the San Telmo lies here?" He nodded. "North of the Lesser Antilles, 100 fathoms deep, and resting, if Rook's ravings are accurate, atop something older still." "Older?" I echoed. "What could predate a 17th century galleon?" Holmes tapped the map. "The codex refers cryptically to La Puerta Roja, the Red Gate. According to Quintana's log, he found it by accident during a storm while chasing a slaver off the coast of San Juan. His priest said it was a ruin from before the Moors, from before the Romans, from an age when the sea still walked upon the land." I scoffed gently. "You believe in such myths now, Holmes?" He gave a rare smile. "I believe that men will kill for them." That afternoon, a coded telegram arrived by way of the Foreign Office. Mycroft Holmes had secured for us discreet passage aboard a scientific vessel, the HMS Laconia, set to leave from Lisbon and bound for a geophysical survey near the Azores. "It will not take us directly to the wreck," Holmes explained, "but it will allow us to depart unnoticed from European waters. Once beyond Madeira, we charter south to the Caribbean, and from there, the final descent begins." We departed England within the week. Our journey to Lisbon was uneventful. save for the discovery, in the mailbag entrusted to our train's conductor, of a letter addressed not to Holmes, but to S.H., Watcher of the Flame. It was sealed with dark green wax. Holmes examined the letter without opening it. "Written with reed ink," he murmured, "coated in fine layers of powdered salt. This came from a coastal monastery, likely Portuguese. But the phrasing, 'Watcher of the Flame,' is older, a title from the Brotherhood." I watched as he slid the letter into his coat. "You won't read it?" I asked. "Not yet," he said grimly. "Not until we leave land." By mid-March, we stood aboard the deck of the HMS Laconia, the white towers of Lisbon vanishing into mist behind us. The crew, unaware of our true mission, believed us to be scholars on a mission to study the migratory patterns of Atlantic eels. As we passed the last lights of Europe, Holmes finally opened the letter. Inside was a single sheet. It bore no signature. "You will not find the Red Gate," it read. "Not with the Codex alone. One piece is still missing, lost in the hands of the Mercador. Seek him in Havana, where the drowned saints walk." Holmes stared into the sea. "The Mercador," he murmured. "That name was whispered once in Rook's cell aboard the Tide Glass, a dealer in dead maps." "Another conspirator? Perhaps not," he said. "Perhaps worse, an opportunist." 3 weeks later, we made landfall in Cuba. It was the end of the dry season, and Havana was alight with noise, color, and revolution. Posters of new socialist heroes fluttered alongside crumbling Spanish palaces. The city hummed with contradictions. Holmes had already arranged contact with a local informant, a half-blind antiquarian named Ramon Izquierdo, who dealt in salvaged manuscripts, outlawed manuscripts, and the prayers of shipwrecked men. He met us at the Plaza de Armas, wrapped in a linen coat that smelled of old rum. "The Mercador?" he whispered after Holmes slipped him a packet of sovereigns. "You want death, Englishman?" "I want a name," Holmes said coldly. Ramon leaned close. "In Regla, the fishing district across the bay. Go at night. Find the chapel where no priest dares kneel. He will find you." That night, under a sky cracked with lightning, we crossed Havana Harbor aboard a skiff. Regla lay still beneath the weight of ancient salt. The streets were narrow, unlit. The air smelled of molasses and fish blood. On a crumbling hillside, we found the chapel. Its door barred, but its lantern lit. Inside, no icon graced the altar, only bones. A man sat in the shadows. His face was gaunt, his eyes the color of brine. On the table before him lay fragments of nautical scrolls, maps inked in red, bits of coral lashed to vellum with waxen threads. "You seek the gate," he said without looking up, "but you are too late." "Too late?" Holmes asked. "The sea has already stirred. The final map is gone." "Gone where?" The Mercador slowly lifted his gaze. "To the belly of the Leviathan. Rook has it. He fed it to his ship." Holmes stiffened. "Then the Tide Glass sails again." The Mercador nodded. "She always sails at the dark moon. To feed." I felt cold to my bones. Holmes, however, only bowed. "Then we'll find her," he said, "even in the dark." We left Havana the next morning, aboard a small cutter bound for the southern edge of the Bermuda Rise. Holmes had calculated the tides, the new moon, and the last confirmed location of the Tide Glass. He stood on deck, scanning the stars with a sextant. "The San Telmo sleeps beneath us," he said at last, "and beneath her the gate." "Then Rook is here?" "Not yet," Holmes whispered, "but he comes." As night fell, a fog rolled across the sea. The wind dropped. Even the gulls vanished. And then, upon the horizon, like the eye of a storm, a single light, low, blue, moving against the current. Holmes turned to me. "It begins." Chapter 6. The Sargasso Key. The sea was utterly still. It is a peculiar silence that settles upon the ocean when it holds its breath. No gulls wheeled overhead. No wind stirred the rigging. The water surrounding our vessel, a battered cutter leased under the alias R. Louis, was thick with sargassum, the golden mats of seaweed known to drift eternally through the North Atlantic. We had reached what Holmes had identified as the Triangle of the Sleeping Saints, a triangular maritime region Holmes calculated using the encrypted coordinates within the Codex and fragments gathered from the Mercador's drowned scrolls. Holmes stood motionless on the prow, spyglass pressed to his brow, his gaze unwavering. "She is here," he whispered. The Tide Glass. And so it was. Through the reeds and mist, a shape emerged, her prow like a dagger, her sails half furled in the windless dusk. No flag, no lanterns. Only the sound of wood groaning under ancient pressure, and the oily gleam of salt-rusted cannonades peering through her sides like blinded eyes. "She isn't anchored," I said, adjusting my revolver with no small unease. "She's drifting." "She's hunting," Holmes replied. We waited until nightfall. Holmes had prepared our descent with ruthless efficiency. He had acquired, through connections within the Royal Navy and Mycroft's Reach, 2 dry-seal diving suits based on a prototype invented by one Professor Harding of Edinburgh. They resembled ghastly things: heavy rubber with brass-ringed helmets, weighted boots, and breathing tubes extending from shoulder packs to miniature air bellows strapped to our backs. Harding claims one could walk across the ocean floor for nearly an hour with these, Holmes explained as he checked the seals, though will only require 10 minutes. I've calculated the wreck's approximate depth at 92 feet. And if you're wrong, then we walk among ghosts. Our plan was as follows. We would dive from our cutter, using the reflected beam of Holmes's lamp and the alignment of Venus and Antares overhead to triangulate the correct descent. The wreck of the San Telmo, or what remained of it, was expected to lie just west of a reef the locals called Dedos del Diablo, the Devil's Fingers. At 23:07, we descended. The world beneath the sea was unlike any dream or nightmare I'd ever known. Silence roared in my ears. The pressure pressed down upon my ribs like an iron corset. Every footstep on the ocean floor stirred ghostly clouds of sand and silt that hung in the black like forgotten breath. We moved cautiously, connected by a line of cord that Holmes had treated with glow paste from the Mercador's satchel. Then, through the gloom, the bones of the San Telmo rose before us. She was vast, broken amid the coral like a sundered cathedral. Her ribs jutted through the seabed, draped in crimson anemones and black lace sponges. A massive breach had torn through her starboard hull, revealing cracked decks and shattered crates. Holmes signaled with a lantern. Down. We descended into her cargo hold, a yawning hollow lit by our flickering shoulder lamps. Here, the codex had pointed. A crate sealed with molten pitch and wrapped in lead rosaries. Holmes pried it open with a crowbar. Inside, bones. Wrapped in linen, marked with symbols older than Latin, and nestled within the ribcage of the corpse, a sphere, the size of a grapefruit, made of fused coral and something else, something darker. Its surface shimmered with bioluminescence, etched in spiral glyphs. Holmes stared, frozen. "It's not gold," he whispered. "It's a key." Then, from above, came a sound no water should carry. A bell. We surfaced gasping, dragging the crate behind us. The sea had changed. Our cutter was gone. Smoke curled across the horizon, and moored less than 100 yards off, unmistakable in the blood-colored moonlight, the tide glass. Holmes pulled us up onto a floating plank. "She waited," he said. "He knew we'd come." And indeed, from the aft of the tide glass, a rowboat approached. 4 men sat within, each armed with cutlasses and black powder carbines. At their prow stood Elias Rook, clad in a crimson naval coat and breathing calmly through an iron tube that hung from his belt. He greeted us as though we were guests. "You found it," he said. "Good." Holmes said nothing. "I had hoped you would," Rook continued, gesturing for his men to lift the crate from the water. "You've always been better with puzzles, Holmes, but you lack imagination. You cannot see what this truly is." "A bauble," Holmes said coldly. Rook's face twitched. "It is the heart of the Red Gate, a key to open what the world forgot. Quintana did not bury treasure. He buried the veil between the known and the unknowable." He turned to me. "Dr. Watson, you've been to war. You've seen the wounded, the shell-shocked, the maimed. What if you could stop such suffering? Undo the very impulse that drives men to violence? Not with weapons, but with memory." "I don't understand," I said. "You will," he replied, holding the sphere up to the moonlight. "This is memory. Not human. Not terrestrial. Carried in from a place the ancients once touched and were right to seal away." Holmes stepped forward. "And you intend to open it?" "I intend," said Rook, "to remember." He raised the sphere, and the sea began to scream. It is difficult to describe what happened next. The sphere glowed, not with light, but with time. The air bent around it. My mind was flooded with images. Ships of bone sailing across glass oceans, stars that moved like ink across vellum, voices that echoed from beneath the floor of reality. I fell to my knees. Holmes did not move, only stared. Then, with a sudden flash, he leapt forward and seized the sphere. The energy recoiled. Rook screamed. the sky turned black, and the sphere cracked. The noise was unbearable. And then, silence. The tide glass, struck by something from within its own decks, reeled backward. A gash opened along its keel. Water poured in. Holmes threw the sphere into the sea. It sank, vanishing into the dark. We awoke adrift. Our cutter, battered but afloat, had returned, found by Remy Jouvet, who had followed Holmes's instructions to wait just beyond the reef. The tide glass was gone, sunk, or fled. The codex, recovered. And the world? Unchanged, but not untouched. Back in London, Holmes refused all congratulations. He sealed the codex in a lead-lined chamber and instructed Mycroft to classify all records under the highest security tier. "It must be forgotten," Holmes said. "That's the only way to keep it from being used." "But you saved us," I told him. He looked at me. "I bought us time." I found Holmes sitting in the forward hold of the cutter, his legs crossed, the remnants of the shattered sphere laid out before him on a tarpaulin. By the dim glow of the ship's lanterns, he was using forceps and a jeweler's loupe to examine the fragments, each no larger than a child's tooth, yet etched in runes that shimmered faintly in the dark. "Careful," I said, descending the ladder. The Mercador warned the residue was psychotropic. Holmes didn't look up. "I am already poisoned, Watson. What remains is only the analysis of the toxin." He gently placed another shard in a jar filled with salt water from the San Telmo's trench. The glow dimmed immediately. "Aquatic activation," he murmured, "and most likely electromagnetic interference at deep oceanic pressure. This is a machine." I sat opposite him, my revolver at my side, still half-soaked and salty. "A machine?" Holmes nodded, his eyes strange in the lamplight. "Not man-made, not built for war or transport or even language as we understand it, but something synthetic, forged to transmit or preserve impressions beyond verbal memory. I saw, not visions, Watson, impressions, like a tide of ancient thought, as if I were not perceiving a dream, but becoming one." He paused. "Rook called it memory, but it was deeper than memory. It was instinct, an emotion older than time." I swallowed, throat dry. "Do you still feel it?" Holmes looked at me fully for the first time. "I feel as though my mind contains echoes, no more. Yet when I close my eyes, I dream of coral that sings." He swept the pieces back into the jar and sealed it shut with a wax plug. "Whatever the red gate was," he said, "it was not meant to be opened." At dawn, Remy Jouvet brought news. "There's movement on the water," he said, pointing west. "Smoke trails. 3 masts. Fast. Could be a cutter or a prize crew." Holmes was already at the spyglass. "She's back," he said. "Not the tide glass, but one of her sisters. That's the Peregrina, built in Cartagena. Twin guns at her bow. She served as a blockade runner during the South American campaigns. Now she sails under Rook's colors." "What would she want with us?" I asked. Holmes lowered the glass. "She wants the codex, the last copy, and perhaps me." He turned to Remy. "Set a southeasterly course. Make for the Turks and Caicos Shoals. There's a British station on Grand Turk where we can signal Mycroft. They won't risk following us into the reefs." "And the codex?" I asked. Holmes opened a waterproof satchel and placed the lead-lined box inside. He then reached into his coat and pulled out a final piece, a long cylindrical lens. Before the sphere shattered, it projected a star chart, a brief flare of alignments, cross constellations, sigils matching those in the codex's rear folio. I captured it using this, an after-image lens. Developed by a colleague of mine at Cambridge, the image fades after 5 days. He sealed the satchel. "We now possess the complete map," he said. "Rook's crew does not." "Then we've won." Holmes gave a tired smile. "No, Watson, we've entered the final act." 2 days later, we made landfall on Grand Turk. Holmes and I sent word to Mycroft via a secret Admiralty cipher, requesting a patrol vessel to meet us in Port Royal within a fortnight. We needed resources, arms, and, as Holmes emphasized in his message, a vessel capable of shadow pursuit and open sea engagement at minimum 3 knots above prevailing wind. The response was swift. The HMS Redoubt, a steam sail hybrid of remarkable stealth, would rendezvous with us in Jamaica. But we were to proceed with care. Intelligence from Havana suggested Rook had agents embedded across the Leeward Islands, all of them searching for the final coordinates. And now they knew Holmes carried them. That evening, Holmes and I sat atop the bluffs overlooking the anchorage. He smoked in silence. "You said once," I murmured, "that men will kill for myth." He nodded. But what happens when the myth kills back? Holmes turned his gaze to the horizon. Then, Watson, the myth becomes history, and history must be buried again. Chapter 7. The Silent Cartographer. The sun hung low and molten above Port Royal's harbor, igniting the sea with strokes of gold and crimson. The once proud city, famed as the wickedest place on earth, bore the patina of history. Weathered stone buildings lined with climbing bougainvillea, their facades cracked but resilient, as though the sins and storms of centuries had only made them stronger. Holmes and I disembarked from the modest steam launch the Admiralty had provided, our boots striking the uneven cobblestones of King Street with the clack of urgency and purpose. Despite the languid heat, an electric tension clung to the humid air, both from the pressing weight of our pursuit and the shadows trailing our every step. Holmes was unusually pensive as we entered the Colonial Archives, a crumbling red brick structure adjacent to the Anglican parish church. The dim interior smelled of aged paper, sea salt, and dust, a sanctuary of whispered secrets. "The answers lie buried here," he said softly. "We seek the logs of Captain Felix Marlowe, the last recorded commander of the San Telmo before her disappearance." The clerk, an elderly Jamaican man named Samuel with eyes sharp as cutlasses, nodded knowingly. Marlowe's logbooks were moved after the 1692 earthquake. Some papers went to England, others were lost in the fire. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Which remain here?" Samuel gestured toward a locked cabinet, its wood darkened and scarred. "This drawer has some salvaged journals and maps from the early 18th century, mostly navigation notes, but one might be of interest." Holmes extracted a small key from his pocket and unlocked it with a deft twist. Inside lay yellowed folios, fragile, watermarked with the fleur-de-lis, ink faded but still legible. Holmes carefully unfolded a parchment map, its edges curled like the petals of a withered flower. Across it were sketched the coastlines of the Caribbean, interspersed with cryptic symbols and annotations in a spidery hand. "What strikes you, Watson?" Holmes asked, his finger tracing a cluster of dots near the Turks and Caicos shoals. I studied the map. These dots, could they mark reefs or underwater hazards? Possibly, but look here. Holmes pointed to a series of overlaid circles, intersecting like a web. He turned the map to a candle's light and revealed faint watermarking in the parchment, a ghostly grid that matched no known cartographic system. "A celestial overlay," Holmes murmured. "This is not a simple chart. It is a code, an astronomical key." We spent hours poring over Marlowe's writings, which included diary entries laced with a growing paranoia. Marlowe wrote of a mysterious figure aboard the San Telmo, a silent cartographer who obsessed over star alignments in the lost city called La Puerta Roja. He described the cartographer as a man of few words, but profound knowledge, perhaps a relic hunter or scholar, Holmes said, glancing up from a brittle journal page. Marlowe feared he was unraveling secrets that should remain hidden. I asked, "Do we know this man's name?" Holmes shook his head. "No direct mention, but a signature appears sporadically on maps within the logbooks, a cryptic mark resembling a stylized trident entwined with a serpent." "The serpent's trident," I mused. Holmes smiled grimly. "A fitting moniker for a man who dabbled in forbidden knowledge." As we left the archives, Holmes's gaze lingered on the crowd gathering near the docks, a ragged band of mercenaries and local informants. The scent of rum and gunpowder mingled in the breeze. "My informant, Lady Celeste Aragon, warned me that Rook has agents here," Holmes said quietly. "We are being watched." Suddenly, a low whistle pierced the air. From the crowd, a shadow detached, a tall man with a jagged scar slicing through his left cheek. "Mr. Holmes?" the man called. A word. Holmes nodded once, then turned and followed the figure into a narrow alley. The man introduced himself as Jacques Leclerc, a French expatriate and former pirate-turned-informant. "I come with a warning," he said, voice rough but urgent. "Rook's men have discovered the existence of Marlowe's logs here. They'll stop at nothing to seize them. You must leave Port Royal before they strike." Holmes folded his arms. "We are already in motion. But why help us?" Leclerc's eyes flicked left and right. "Because Rook betrayed me, took my crew and left us for dead near the Sargasso. I owe you no love, but this secret, it will drown us all if it falls into the wrong hands." He pressed a folded note into Holmes's palm and vanished before we could inquire further. Back at our quarters, Holmes opened the note by lamplight. Inside was a fragment of a map, roughly drawn, annotated in an unfamiliar hand, and a single line scrawled beneath. "Seek the chamber beneath the old fort, where the water whispers." Holmes tapped his fingers thoughtfully. "This fort is likely the ruins of Fort Charles, abandoned after the earthquake. A prime hiding place." "Then that is our next destination." As night deepened, Port Royal's calm was a fragile veneer. Holmes and I prepared our gear: lanterns, ropes, and a canvas satchel packed with essentials. Outside, the wind carried faint strains of a church bell and the distant roar of the ocean. Holmes looked to me, his eyes steely. "Tomorrow, Watson, we descend into the shadows of history itself and face those who would kill to rewrite it." The early dawn cast a pallid glow over Port Royal as Holmes and I approached the ancient ruins of Fort Charles. Time and tempest had not been kind to the fort's bastions, walls cracked and choked with vines, cannon emplacements sunken and rusted, the air thick with the scent of salt and decay. The place seemed haunted by centuries of whispers, and as we passed beneath its archways, the very stones seemed to hold their breath. "We must tread carefully, Watson," Holmes murmured. "The map's instructions are vague, but the clue where the water whispers suggests a chamber linked to the sea, perhaps a cistern or a submerged vault." I adjusted my revolver, heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The shadows lengthened as we crossed the courtyard, the silence broken only by the distant call of a lone gull and the occasional drip of water from a broken gutter. Holmes produced a coil of rope and a lantern from his satchel. "There," he said, pointing a moss-covered iron ring embedded in the floor near the eastern wall. Beneath it, a narrow hatch yawned open, revealing a spiral staircase that descended into darkness. "It matches the description of a secret passage documented in the fort's blueprints," Holmes explained. "Captain Marlowe's logs hinted at an escape route for emergencies, one that led to the shoreline." We exchanged a glance, the gravity of our discovery settling heavily upon us. "After you, Holmes." He descended first, lantern held aloft. The stone steps were slick with moisture, and the air grew cooler and damper as we ventured deeper. The faint sound of dripping water echoed through the narrow shaft, a ghostly whisper of the ocean's proximity. At last, the staircase opened into a vaulted chamber, its walls slick with salt and encrusted with centuries of mineral deposits. In the center lay a pool of brackish water, illuminated faintly by the lantern's glow. Holmes knelt beside the pool, tracing the rim with a gloved hand. "This is no ordinary cistern," he mused. "The water is unusually clear, though briny, and there's a faint vibration, almost a hum, emanating from beneath." I peered into the depths, catching a glint of something metallic half buried in the silt. Holmes produced a slender iron hook and carefully retrieved the object. A rusted box, sealed tight with a clasp encrusted in coral. "An underwater cache," he said, "and possibly our silent cartographer's final resting place." The clasp resisted, but Holmes's patience paid off. With a soft click, the box opened, revealing a tightly rolled parchment tied with a faded red ribbon. Unrolling the parchment, Holmes's eyes scanned the delicate script and complex diagrams. The map was overlaid with constellations unfamiliar to modern navigation, and annotations in a cryptic cipher. "This is extraordinary," he breathed. "A celestial map guiding the way not by stars, but by something more arcane." Among the notes was a brief entry in English, penned in a hand both deliberate and trembling. "To those who seek the gate, beware the tide that claims the unworthy. The red gate opens only for those who carry the burden of silence." Holmes's expression darkened. "A warning, Watson, and perhaps a curse." Suddenly, footsteps echoed from above, harsh and hurried. Shadows flickered against the chamber walls as lanterns were thrust into the descent. From the hatch, armed men spilled down the stairs, Rook's mercenaries. "Holmes!" I hissed. He rose swiftly, pulling a compact revolver from his coat. "Watson, take the left flank. I'll cover the exit." Gunfire erupted in the confined space, the crack of pistols mingling with shouts and the splash of water. The narrow chamber became a cacophony of chaos, each man fighting for possession of the map, and perhaps their lives. I felt the searing pain of a graze on my arm but pressed forward, firing at a figure lunging toward Holmes. Holmes returned fire with deadly precision, his calm demeanor never faltering amid the violence. Realizing we were outnumbered, Holmes shouted, Retreat! Back to the stairs! We scrambled up as gunfire chased us, then burst into the daylight just as the mercenaries reached the hatch. Holmes slammed the iron ring shut and locked it with the heavy chain he had pulled from his satchel. Panting, we fled through the fort's labyrinthine corridors, then out into the hot morning sun, hearts pounding but map in hand. "We have what we came for," Holmes said grimly, "but Rook grows bolder. We cannot linger." As we hurried back to our quarters, Holmes stopped and looked toward the harbor. "Watson, the chase is far from over. Rook has the resources and ruthlessness to match us every step, but we now hold the silent cartographer's last secret." He turned, eyes sharp and resolute. "It's time we confront the heart of this mystery, and the man who will kill to possess it." Chapter 8. Beneath Fort Charles. The sweltering heat of the Caribbean sun had barely softened when Holmes and I made our way back toward the ruins of Fort Charles. The events of the previous night, our narrow escape from Rook's men, and the discovery of the silent cartographer's celestial map, hung heavily between us like an ominous cloud. Every step we took seemed shadowed by the knowledge that the enemy was closer than ever. Holmes moved with his usual deliberate calm, but I detected a tension beneath his composed exterior, the subtle tightening of his jaw and the steely gleam in his eyes that I knew all too well. This was a man burdened not just with a mystery, but with the weight of a dangerous pursuit. As we crossed the cracked stone courtyard, the ruins seemed to whisper history's secrets, the peeling plaster and rusted cannon a testament to forgotten battles and lost souls. The air was thick with salt and decay, and the silence was punctuated only by the distant tolling of the parish church bell. Holmes paused by a collapsed wall and pointed toward a narrow fissure barely visible behind a curtain of hanging vines. "This, Watson, is the hidden entrance to the catacombs beneath the fort, the silent cartographer's final refuge." I nodded, checking my revolver as I followed him into the shadows. A faint mustiness enveloped us as we descended a narrow, winding stairway, carved roughly from limestone and worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, or perhaps by neglect. Our lanterns cast flickering beams across the walls, revealing faded frescoes of colonial emblems and cryptic symbols, their colors dulled but their meanings still potent. Holmes ran his gloved fingers over the carvings. "These inscriptions," he whispered, "were a code known only to a secret order of navigators and scholars. They believed the stars held the power to unlock hidden truths." We advanced deeper until the stairwell opened into a vaulted chamber lined with rows of iron-bound crates and wooden chests, stacked as if awaiting retrieval. Holmes approached one chest and brushed away the dust, revealing a faded crest, a serpent entwined around a trident. "The mark of the silent cartographer," Holmes said with a rare note of reverence. With a practiced hand, he pried open the chest's heavy lid. Inside lay a collection of journals, star charts, and most curiously, a small, intricately carved wooden box. Holmes lifted the box carefully. It was warm to the touch and carved with interlacing patterns of waves and stars. The lid bore an inscription in an archaic dialect. "This language," Holmes said, "is an extinct Creole spoken by the early mariners of the Spanish Main." He ran his finger along the text, then produced a small notebook and began translating aloud. "To he who holds this box, I grant passage beyond the veil, where light and shadow converge and the sea breathes secrets. Guard it well, for it holds the key to the red gate." I felt a chill creep along my spine. "Is it a key? What sort of key?" Holmes shook his head. "Not a key of metal or wood, but a cipher key. A tool to decode the final map. This box likely contains the instruments needed to unlock cryptic coordinates." He carefully opened the box, revealing a small brass astrolabe, a set of ivory tiles engraved with strange sigils, and a folded piece of vellum sealed with red wax. Holmes broke the wax seal with deft fingers and unfolded the vellum. It was a letter, penned in an elegant hand but tinged with urgency. "To those who follow the trail of the San Telmo, know that your path will cross with darkness. The treasure you seek is guarded not only by time and tide, but by those who would kill to keep it secret. Trust no one but the stars themselves." Holmes's eyes narrowed. Elias Rook must have intercepted this warning. It explains his relentless pursuit. I glanced over his shoulder. "Do you think this red gate is truly a gateway to treasure? Or something more?" Holmes's expression grew grave. The legends speak of both gold and something far older, an artifact of immense power. This pursuit, Watson, is no mere treasure hunt. It is a struggle for a secret that could reshape history. A sudden noise, footsteps echoing down the stairway, shattered the silence. Holmes snapped the box shut and gestured sharply. "Hide, Watson!" We melted into the shadows as two figures descended, their voices low but urgent. "I tell you, the English have the map," hissed a man's voice, thick with a French accent. "They are close. Rook demands results. We cannot fail." Holmes pressed his back against the cool stone, muscles coiled like a spring. As the men passed, I glimpsed the gleam of pistols and the unmistakable cut of a dark coat embroidered with the sigil of the Red Gate serpent. When the men moved beyond earshot, Holmes whispered, "They've found the entrance. Our time here is measured." We retraced our steps with haste, but the narrow corridors and twisting passages seemed to shift like a labyrinth designed to confuse intruders. Every creak and drip of water amplified the tension. Emerging into the open air, the Caribbean sun dazzled us as if marking our narrow escape. Holmes looked toward the distant harbor where the HMS Redoubt was anchored. We must warn the Admiralty and prepare for the coming storm. Rook's shadow falls heavy, and the tide of fate turns with it. The secret beneath Fort Charles had been uncovered, but the true danger was only beginning. For in the dark waters of the Caribbean, old ghosts stirred, and the chase for the Red Gate promised to claim more than treasure. It threatened to consume every soul drawn into its mystery. The thick heat of the Caribbean sun beat down mercilessly as Holmes and I retreated from the dank catacombs beneath Fort Charles, clutching the precious wooden box and the newly uncovered parchments. The weight of the secret we now possessed pressed heavily upon us, more oppressive than the humid air that clung to our clothes. Holmes's gaze was fixed ahead, steely and unreadable, as if calculating every potential move our pursuers might make. I followed closely, the soft thud of our boots against the weathered stone the only sound aside from the distant cry of seabirds circling above the harbor. "This map," Holmes finally broke the silence, "and the cipher instruments contained within that box, they are more than mere curiosities. They are the key to unlocking not just treasure, but truths long buried beneath layers of myth and deception." I glanced at the small brass astrolabe he carried carefully in his palm. Its delicate dials and gears caught the light, a curious juxtaposition of beauty and menace. "But the letter," I said, "the warning that the treasure is guarded by those who would kill to keep it secret. That sounds ominously like Elias Rook's handiwork." Holmes nodded slowly. "Indeed. Rook is a man who thrives on shadows and whispers. He will not rest until this secret is his." We made our way through the winding alleys of Port Royal, the bustle of market traders and sailors only partially dispelling the sense of encroaching menace. Holmes paused briefly at a stall, purchasing a battered leather satchel and some provisions. "We must prepare," he said. "The pursuit will grow ever more perilous." Just then, a familiar figure appeared from the crowd, a lithe woman with dark eyes and an air of quiet authority. Lady Celeste d'Aragon, our invaluable informant, approached with a quick, graceful step. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she greeted, her voice low but urgent. "Word travels fast in these parts. Rook's men are combing the docks and taverns, seeking any clue. You must leave Port Royal soon, or you will be trapped." Holmes regarded her with a cool appraisal. "And yet, Lady Celeste, the trail leads nowhere if we flee now. We need time to decipher the cipher and find the true location of the Red Gate." Her eyes flashed with a fierce determination. "Then allow me to assist. I have contacts among the fishermen and smugglers, men who know these waters like the back of their hands. I can arrange a discreet passage for you." Holmes smiled, a rare softness touching his lips. "Your help is most welcome, Lady Celeste. The sea may yet be our salvation." That evening, as the crimson light of sunset bled over the horizon, we gathered in our modest lodgings by the harbor. The small room smelled of salt and candle smoke, a fitting stage for the unraveling of ancient mysteries. Holmes laid the brass astrolabe on the table, the ivory cipher tiles carefully spread out like some arcane puzzle. With painstaking care, he began aligning the instruments with the constellations sketched on the celestial map we had recovered. Hours passed as he worked, muttering to himself in a language of stars and angles. I observed the intensity of his focus, the sharp gleam in his eyes as fragments of understanding flickered like lightning. Suddenly, Holmes straightened, a triumphant glint lighting his features. Watson, the coordinates. The red gate is not a physical gate, but a submerged cavern, hidden beneath a shifting reef off the coast of Grand Turk Island. I leaned in, heart quickening. A pirate's hiding place? More than that. According to Marlowe's logs and the cartographer's notes, it is a natural chamber shaped by the tides and stars, a vault that only reveals itself when the celestial bodies align in a particular pattern. The implications were staggering. This was no simple treasure hunt. It was a game played across centuries, with players who understood the language of the heavens and the secrets of the deep. As the moon rose high above Port Royal, casting silver shadows across the harbor, Holmes's expression darkened. "We must move swiftly, Watson. Rook will not wait for the tides to turn." Before we could rest, a sharp knock rattled the door. Lady Celeste entered, her face pale but resolute. "They've found a new lead," she said breathlessly. "Rook's men have captured one of my contacts, a fisherman named Miguel. They intend to break him for information." Holmes clenched his jaw. "Then we have little time to lose." That night, under cover of darkness, we arranged passage aboard a small schooner bound for Grand Turk Island. As the ship slipped silently from the harbor, the tension aboard was palpable, each man and woman knowing the perilous road ahead. Holmes stood at the prow, eyes fixed on the endless black sea, the distant stars wheeling overhead like silent sentinels. "Tonight," he murmured, "we cross from legend into danger, and the line between friend and foe grows thinner still." The hunt for the Red Gate had entered a new phase, and the secret of the encrypted letter was closer to revelation than ever before. Chapter 9. The Storm of Shadows. The schooner rocked gently beneath a cloudless sky as it carved its way through the sapphire waters of the Caribbean. The stars overhead glimmered with icy clarity, each one a silent witness to the peril that trailed us like a shadow. Holmes stood at the bow, his sharp gaze scanning the dark horizon, while I sat near the rail, nursing the burn of exhaustion that had settled into my limbs. The night was deceptively calm, yet an unsettling tension thrummed through the air. Lady Celeste moved silently among the crew, issuing terse orders and casting wary glances toward the nearby islands. Though her presence was reassuring, I sensed the storm of danger gathering both above and below the waves. As the vessel approached the coordinates Holmes had painstakingly decoded, a sudden chill swept over us, and the sea seemed to deepen into an abyssal blackness. The captain, a grizzled man named Thomas Kane, muttered under his breath about the curse that hung over these waters, whispers of the San Telmo's ghost and a treasure guarded by more than mere men. Holmes listened intently but offered no comment. His mind was occupied with the encrypted letter, the celestial maps, and the riddles that had led us to this moment. Around midnight, the lookout shouted from the crow's nest, "Land ho! Grand Turk, dead ahead!" The island loomed as a dark silhouette against the starry sky, its jagged coastline obscured by rolling mist. The air grew heavier, and eerie stillness blanketed the ship. Holmes turned to Lady Celeste, his voice low. "The Red Gate lies hidden among those reefs. We must be cautious. The tides shift unpredictably, and the map warns of more than just natural hazards." We dropped anchor in a secluded cove, shrouded by dense mangroves and the distant sound of crashing surf. The crew set about preparing the small rowboats for a shore expedition, their faces grim and alert. Holmes gathered the parchment and the cipher box, his fingers tracing the intricate symbols one last time. "We have little time before dawn, Watson. The alignment that reveals the cavern's entrance is fleeting." Under the pale moonlight, we slipped from the schooner into the boats, the oars whispering against the water. The island's dense foliage pressed close, shadows shifting as unseen creatures stirred in the underbrush. We navigated toward a narrow channel marked on the map, a passage winding through sharp coral reefs like the teeth of some ancient leviathan. Holmes's eyes gleamed as he consulted the astrolabe, confirming the stars' positions with unwavering certainty. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the stillness, shattering the fragile calm. Shouts erupted from the shore. Rook's men had anticipated our arrival. The chase was upon us. We scrambled into the jungle, branches clawing at our faces, the sharp scent of salt and earth mingling with the acrid smoke of gunpowder. Holmes's voice cut through the chaos. "This way, Watson. The cavern's mouth must be near." The ground beneath our feet gave way to a narrow ledge overlooking a vast underwater cavern, its mouth a yawning abyss swallowed by shadows and shimmering tide. Holmes produced a small lantern, its light flickering against the jagged stone. "Here lies the red gate." We descended carefully, the sound of pursuing footsteps growing fainter as we plunged into the cavern's depths. The water inside was eerily still, the air thick with the scent of brine and ancient secrets. At the chamber's center, illuminated by a shaft of moonlight filtering through a crack above, was a stone pedestal bearing an intricate carving, a serpent entwined with a trident, the emblem from the chest below Fort Charles. Holmes set the cipher tiles upon the pedestal, manipulating them until a hidden mechanism clicked. The cavern trembled and the water receded slightly, revealing a narrow passage beyond. But as we prepared to enter, a familiar voice echoed through the chamber. "Holmes, always a pleasure." From the shadows stepped Elias Rook himself, flanked by armed men. His eyes glittered with ruthless intent. "The secret is mine, Sherlock. Hand it over, and I may spare your lives." Holmes's reply was cold steel. "Rook, you underestimate the cost of greed. This secret is not yours to command." Rook's cold smile was like a shadow folding over the cavern's darkness. His men spread out, pistols drawn and eyes gleaming with ruthless intent. The air was thick with tension, the salt and dampness of the cavern intermingling with the scent of danger. Holmes stepped forward, his posture unyielding, eyes locked onto Rook's. "You believe this treasure is merely gold and jewels," he said quietly, "but you do not comprehend the true cost of what lies here." Rook's lip curled in disdain. "Enough riddles, Holmes. The past is dust, and I want what is tangible: power, wealth, leverage. Surrender the cipher and the map." Holmes glanced briefly toward me and Lady Celeste. "We will not. You are blinded by ambition and fear." With a sudden fluid motion, Holmes flicked a concealed switch on the pedestal. The cavern trembled, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow tunnel lit by phosphorescent moss, casting an eerie, ghostly glow. Without hesitation, Holmes gestured toward the passage. "If it's a game of shadows and secrets you desire, come and claim it. But beware, this place is guarded not only by stone and sea, but by traps devised centuries ago." Rook snarled, barking orders to his men to advance. The first few stepped forward cautiously, wary of the hidden dangers Holmes hinted at. Suddenly, a series of clicks echoed, and a volley of small darts shot from concealed holes in the cavern walls, grazing some of Rook's men with stinging pain. Shouts and curses followed as several staggered back, clutching their arms. Holmes seized the moment. "Now, Watson?" I drew my revolver and followed Holmes into the tunnel, Lady Celeste close behind. The walls closed in as we moved deeper, the path twisting and turning like the coils of a serpent. Rook's men pursued, grim determination etched into their faces. But the cavern itself seemed to conspire against them. Hidden pitfalls, treacherous ledges slick with seaweed, and sudden drops made every step perilous. At one point, Holmes paused before a massive stone door etched with the same serpent and trident emblem. He raised the brass astrolabe and turned the dials, the mechanism clicking into place. With a low rumble, the door began to slide open. Inside lay a chamber, illuminated by shafts of light filtering through cracks in the cavern ceiling. Ancient chests and crates were piled high, their timbers weathered but intact. Among them were artifacts of a bygone age: gilded chalices, ornate weapons, and scrolls sealed in wax. But what caught Holmes's eye was a peculiar device resting atop a pedestal, a compass of curious make, its needle spinning erratically as if caught between worlds. "The true treasure," Holmes said, voice hushed. "A device said to reveal not just location, but the course of fate itself." Before we could examine it further, a loud crash echoed behind us. Rook had forced his way through the door, his eyes blazing with fury. The final struggle erupted, a desperate, fierce battle amid the relics of centuries past. Pistols fired, echoes bouncing off stone walls. Holmes and I fought with all the skill and resolve we possessed, while Lady Celeste wielded a hidden dagger with deadly precision. In the chaos, the compass was knocked from its pedestal, sliding across the stone floor toward the cavern's edge. Holmes lunged for it just as Rook tackled him, the two men grappling fiercely. I raised my revolver and fired, the shot ringing out sharply. Rook staggered, eyes wild with rage, but Holmes broke free, clutching the compass tightly. The cavern trembled once more, the sea beyond roaring as waves crashed against the jagged rocks. The ceiling groaned ominously. "We must leave!" Holmes shouted. "This place will not hold together much longer." We fled through the twisting passages as the cavern began to collapse, stones crashing and dust choking the air. The roar of the surf grew louder, a reminder that the ocean had claimed its secrets once more. Emerging into the fresh night air, drenched and gasping, we looked back to see the entrance sealed by a thunderous cascade of rock and water. Holmes held the compass close. The red gate is closed to all, but those who understand the language of stars and shadows. Lady Celeste exhaled, relief flooding her face. "And what now, Mr. Holmes?" He looked toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to paint the sky in hues of rose and gold. "Now, Watson," he said quietly, "we prepare for the next move. For in this game, the truth is a treasure more elusive than gold, and far more dangerous." Chapter 10. The gathering storm, the dawn furled over the Caribbean like a silken banner, the sky awash with soft hues of rose and amber, yet beneath its tranquil beauty, a storm was gathering, not just in the heavens, but in the tangled web of human ambitions. Holmes, Lady Celeste, and I stood at the edge of the cove, the wreckage of the collapsed cavern still fresh in our minds. The compass, now safely in Holmes's grasp, felt heavier than any ordinary artifact. The ocean's restless pulse seemed to echo the unease in our hearts. Holmes's eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the horizon, where the schooner awaited. "This victory," he mused, "is but a single move on a vast chessboard. Elias Rook is cunning and ruthless. We cannot assume this defeat will deter him." Lady Celeste folded her arms, her gaze steely. "His men are like wolves. Once one hunt fails, they regroup, more vicious than before." I nodded, sensing the truth in her words. The mystery of the San Telmo and its treasure was no mere folly of greedy men. It was a storm that threatened to engulf all of us. Back aboard the schooner, the crew worked silently, their faces shadowed with fatigue and apprehension. Captain Kane, a man as weathered as the sea itself, approached Holmes. "Sir, we'll make for Kingston at first light. There, you'll find allies and means to continue your pursuit. But be warned, the governor's court is no friend to secrets like these." Holmes's gaze hardened. "We have no choice. The game grows more dangerous by the hour." As the ship cut through the waves, I found myself reflecting on the strange paths that had led us here. An encrypted letter, a missing politician, an ancient pirate's curse, and now the elusive red gate. The compass in Holmes's possession seemed less a mere trinket and more a key to something far greater. That evening, as the schooner sailed beneath a tapestry of stars, Holmes and I sat in the dim glow of the cabin. He spread the parchments and cipher tiles across the rough wooden table. "The astrolabe, the cipher, and now the compass. They are parts of a single mechanism, Watson," he said, his fingers tracing the intricate designs. "Together, they point to something hidden even from the legends, a secret that might alter the balance of power in this empire." My thoughts turned to Elias Rook, a man so consumed by ambition that he would threaten lives and history alike. But what of the missing politician, Algernon Thorne? Had he truly staged his own disappearance to mislead his rivals, or was there more yet concealed beneath his calculated silence? Suddenly, a sharp rap came at the door. Lady Celeste entered, her expression grave. "News from Kingston," she announced. "Rook has powerful allies, men within the governor's circle. If we are to proceed, we must tread carefully. The enemy's reach extends beyond the seas." Holmes nodded, the familiar fire igniting in his eyes. "Then we prepare for the gathering storm, for when men covet secrets too long buried, chaos follows." The night deepened as we plotted our next course, the compass's needle quivering ever so slightly, as if eager to guide us onward into the unknown. The schooner cut through the Caribbean waves under a velvet canopy of stars, each celestial body a silent witness to the unfolding drama below. In the cabin, a flickering oil lamp cast long shadows on the walls, outlining the faces of Holmes, Lady Celeste, and myself as we huddled over the cipher parchments and the enigmatic compass. The quiet was pregnant with tension, broken only by the rhythmic slap of water against the hull. Holmes's fingers traced the delicate gears of the astrolabe, aligning it meticulously with the cryptic diagrams we had recovered. "This compass," he murmured, eyes narrowing, "is unlike any instrument I have encountered. It does not simply point north. It seems to react to something far more obscure, perhaps to celestial configurations or even magnetic anomalies unique to this region." Lady Celeste leaned closer, her brows knit. "It is as if the device holds the very soul of the San Telmo's secret, the key that reveals the path no man has trod for centuries." I couldn't help but shiver at the thought. We were grappling with puzzles crafted in a world long vanished, the handiwork of men who had charted courses by starlight and hidden treasures beneath curses and legends. Holmes glanced up sharply. Yet, as always, the greatest peril is human greed, masquerading as destiny. Elias Rook is a man whose ambition blinds him to all but the prize. His alliance with corrupt officials in Kingston means we face enemies both at sea and in the halls of power. Lady Celeste's eyes darkened. The governor's court is riddled with intrigue. Thorne's disappearance has left a vacuum, and many seek to fill it with their own agendas. We must be cautious. Our enemies wear masks and speak in whispers. I cleared my throat, unsettled. What of Algernon Thorne himself? Do you truly believe he staged his own vanishing to mislead his foes? Such a gamble seems extraordinary. Holmes smiled faintly. Extraordinary men take extraordinary measures, Watson. Thorne is not merely a politician. He is a man entangled in webs of secrets stretching back decades. His knowledge of the Red Gate and the San Telmo's treasure was unparalleled. It was precisely that knowledge which made him both powerful and vulnerable. The cabin door creaked, and Captain Kane entered, his weather-beaten face creased with concern. "We'll reach Kingston by dawn. The town is alive with rumors, strange lights in the harbor, ships coming and going at odd hours. The political climate is tense. The governor's advisors whisper of conspiracies and betrayals." Holmes nodded grimly. "Then we arrive into a nest of vipers. We must move carefully, for the game now is not merely of treasure, but of survival." As the night deepened, we discussed our next steps. Lady Celeste, with her network of informants and allies among Kingston's shadowy underbelly, promised to gather intelligence. Holmes and I would seek out old acquaintances, politicians, scholars, and even pirates, anyone who could shed light on the true stakes of this treasure hunt. The compass lay between us on the table, its needle twitching unpredictably. It seemed almost alive, as though aware of the tumult we had yet to face. When I retired to my bunk, the weight of the day's discoveries pressed upon me like the humid night air. Questions swirled relentlessly. What was the true nature of the San Telmo's treasure? Why had it been so zealously guarded? And most vexing of all, where, amidst the shifting alliances and veiled threats, did Algernon Thorne truly stand? Kingston greeted us with the clamorous bustle of a colonial port rife with opportunity and danger. The streets were a tapestry of scents and sounds, spices mingled with salt and sweat. Voices in a dozen languages rose over the clang of blacksmiths' hammers, and traders hawked goods both exotic and illicit. Holmes moved among the crowd with the ease of a man long accustomed to such environments, his keen eyes missing nothing. Lady Celeste's contacts emerged from the shadows. Weathered fishermen, furtive merchants, and quick-witted street urchins, all whispering rumors of strange gatherings, secret meetings, and a powerful faction intent on seizing the treasure at any cost. Our inquiries led us to a dimly lit tavern nestled in the heart of Kingston's old quarter, a place where deals were struck in the shadows and secrets were the currency of the realm. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the low murmur of conspirators. Holmes's gaze settled on a solitary figure seated in a corner, a man of sharp features and sharp eyes who nodded subtly when our presence was noted. "This is Gideon Marsh," Lady Celeste explained in a low voice, "a scholar of maritime history and a man with connections to both the colonial elite and the local underworld." Marsh's voice was smooth, almost hypnotic, as he spoke of legends tied to the San Telmo, of cursed gold, hidden coves, and the bloody betrayals that had sealed the pirate's fate. Yet beneath the romance of the tale, there was an undercurrent of something darker, a warning that some treasures were meant to remain hidden, their guardians ruthless and unforgiving. Holmes listened intently, interjecting with questions that drew out details no ordinary scholar might know. Details that matched the cryptic clues in the encrypted letter and the celestial cipher. As the night wore on, it became clear that the threads we were pulling were part of a vast tapestry, one woven with ambition, fear, and the unyielding human desire for power. But even as we pieced together fragments of truth, shadows lengthened beyond the tavern's flickering lamps. Rook's agents were not far behind, and the game was accelerating toward a perilous climax. Holmes's eyes met mine across the table, the familiar spark of determination burning bright. "We stand at the crossroads, Watson," he said quietly. "The path forward is fraught with danger, but also revelation. The secret of the encrypted letter is no longer just a puzzle. It is a summons, and we must answer." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the distant rumble of thunder, a gathering storm, both in the sky and in the hearts of men. The night in Kingston thickened, as if the very air conspired to smother us with secrets. The tavern's low-ceilinged room seemed to close in, the flickering candlelight casting erratic shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Gideon Marsh leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The San Telmo's treasure is no ordinary plunder. It is said to be cursed, yes, but more than that, a key to ancient power. The pirate who commanded the ship was rumored to possess knowledge of the stars and seas that few could comprehend. His map, encoded in symbols and stars, is a cipher to unlock a mystery far greater than mere gold." Holmes's eyes gleamed as he absorbed the tale. The astrolabe and compass we found, tools for navigation certainly, but also instruments of cryptography and celestial alignment. It would explain why the letter was encoded with such complexity. Marsh nodded. "Exactly, and the treasure is guarded not just by traps and tides, but by men who understand its true significance. Men like Elias Rook." Lady Celeste folded her arms. "His influence runs deep in Kingston. There are whispers that he has allies even within the governor's council, men who would rather see the city in turmoil than let Thorne's legacy slip away." I glanced around the room, noting the furtive glances of other patrons. Danger lurked in every corner. "How do we uncover the truth without drawing the wrath of those men?" Holmes smiled thinly. "With patience, subtlety, and the right allies." He turned to Marsh. "You have contacts among the scholars and sailors. Can you aid us in tracing the pirate's path, perhaps locating the next clue?" Marsh tapped the table, thoughtful. "There is a man, a cartographer, who possesses charts long thought lost. He lives on the outskirts, away from prying eyes. If you wish to follow this trail, he will be essential." Lady Celeste exchanged a glance with Holmes. "Then we must visit this cartographer at first light. But we must be wary. Rook's men grow bolder. We are not the only ones hunting shadows." The conversation was abruptly interrupted by a commotion outside. The tavern door burst open, revealing two rough-looking men clad in the livery of the governor's guards. Their eyes swept the room with suspicion before settling on our group. Holmes's jaw tightened. "It seems our presence is not as discreet as we hoped." The leader of the guard stepped forward, voice laced with menace. "We have orders to question anyone connected with Algernon Thorne's disappearance. You three especially." Lady Celeste's expression hardened. "And what proof do you have that we are involved?" The man sneered. "Proof is unnecessary when the governor's will is clear. You will come with us." Holmes rose slowly, his gaze icy. "I advise caution. These men are guests in a place of learning, not accused criminals. Your haste will do no good." A tense silence fell. Then, as if on cue, a sudden shout erupted outside. The guards exchanged glances, distracted. Taking advantage of the moment, Holmes motioned to us. "Now, Watson." We slipped through a back door into the maze of Kingston's narrow alleyways, the night swallowing us as we fled from the threat. The sounds of pursuit echoed behind us, but our familiarity with the city's labyrinthine streets gave us an edge. Eventually, we reached a safe house arranged by Lady Celeste, a modest dwelling shaded by tangled vines and the scent of jasmine. Inside, we caught our breath, the adrenaline slowly ebbing. Holmes placed the compass on the wooden table, his fingers tracing its spinning needle. "This device seems to respond to more than magnetic forces. It reacts to the presence of certain minerals and metals. If the pirate's treasure was hidden among such elements, this compass could guide us to it." I looked toward Lady Celeste. Do you think Thorne's disappearance is tied to his attempts to secure this treasure? Was he running from his enemies or leading them astray? She shook her head, eyes troubled. Both, perhaps. He knew the stakes and chose to vanish rather than risk the city falling into chaos. But his silence only deepens the danger. Holmes's voice was calm, but resolute. Then we must press on. The encrypted letter was only the beginning. The true secret lies ahead, concealed in riddles and peril, and those who seek it will not hesitate to kill. The night deepened around us, the distant drums of Kingston's nightlife a reminder that beneath the veneer of civilization, a battle for power and secrets raged on. Chapter 11, Shadows. Among the governor's court. The streets of Kingston woke beneath a blistering sun, the scent of salt and spice mingling in the humid air as the colonial city stirred to life. Holmes, Lady Celeste, and I navigated through the bustling market square, weaving among traders peddling silks from the Orient, barrels of rum, and crates of tropical fruit. Yet, despite the vibrant facade, an undercurrent of unease pulsed through the city, whispers of treachery and eyes that watched from shadowed doorways. Our destination was the governor's residence, an imposing Georgian manor perched above the harbor. The building's whitewashed walls gleamed in the sunlight, a symbol of imperial order amid colonial unrest. It was here, we hoped, that we might penetrate the tangled web surrounding Algernon Thorne's disappearance and Elias Rook's growing influence. Lady Celeste moved with quiet confidence, her connections within Kingston's elite affording us access denied to most strangers. As we passed through guarded gates and marble halls, I could not help but notice the delicate balance of power etched into every gesture. The curt nods, the veiled glances, the undercurrent of rivalry masked by polite smiles. At length, we were ushered into the governor's study, a vast room adorned with heavy tapestries depicting naval battles and colonial triumphs. Seated behind an ornate desk was Governor Marcus Pembroke, a man in his early 50s, his gray eyes sharp and calculating beneath a furrowed brow. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, Lady Celeste," he greeted with a formality that barely concealed his wariness. "Your arrival is timely. There are troubling matters afoot." Holmes inclined his head. "Your Excellency, we seek to understand the full extent of these troubles. The disappearance of Mr. Thorne and the disturbances surrounding the San Telmo treasure have unsettled many. We require your counsel." Pembroke's lips tightened. Thorne was a man of ambition and secrets. His absence leaves a vacuum dangerous to fill, more so with men like Rook exploiting every opportunity to consolidate power. His reach within my council grows. Lady Celeste spoke with measured calm. "We have evidence that Rook's influence is not only political but extends to criminal enterprises within Kingston. He commands loyalty through fear and bribery." Pembroke's eyes darkened. "And you believe this treasure is the catalyst?" Holmes stepped forward, voice steady. "The encrypted letter, the astrolabe, the compass, all point to a secret that could shift the balance of power. We must uncover who truly controls the hunt." Pembroke sighed heavily. "I am constrained by politics, Mr. Holmes. To openly oppose Rook invites chaos. But there are those among my advisors who fear his growing ambition. You would do well to seek out Lord Charles Fenwick, a man with grudges against Rook and resources to match." Holmes nodded. "We shall approach him with care." Before we could depart, a sharp knock interrupted the meeting. A young aide entered, pale and breathless. "Your Excellency, urgent news. Rook's men have been spotted near the harbor, meeting with known smugglers. There is talk of an imminent move on the treasure." Pembroke's gaze flickered with alarm. "Then time is against us. Mr. Holmes, the city's fate may rest in your hands." As we left the governor's residence, the weight of responsibility pressed heavily upon us. Lady Celeste murmured, "We must tread carefully. The game is no longer confined to treasure maps and secret codes. It is a contest of influence and survival." Holmes's eyes burned with resolve. "Indeed, Watson, the shadows of Kingston conceal many secrets, and only by illuminating them can we hope to prevail." The city around us thrummed with life and menace alike, a stage set for a perilous confrontation where every ally might be a traitor and every secret a weapon. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Holmes, Lady Celeste, and I found ourselves navigating the labyrinthine alleys of Kingston, heading toward the estate of Lord Charles Fenwick. The city, though vibrant with colonial energy, carried an uneasy tension beneath its surface, as if every passerby was an actor playing a dangerous role in a drama yet to be fully revealed. Holmes walked with his usual brisk pace, eyes scanning every shadow and corner as if the city itself whispered secrets only he could hear. Lady Celeste, always graceful and poised, carried an air of steely determination that seemed to steady us both amid the swirling uncertainties. "I confess, Watson," Holmes said, glancing at me with a faint smile, "Kingston is unlike the streets of London. Here, politics and piracy dance a dangerous waltz beneath the veneer of civilization." I nodded. Indeed, it's a city where the law bends to power and power hides behind the guise of respectability. Lady Celeste raised a delicate brow. Power is a commodity as fluid as the sea. It can be seized by force or whispered into existence by cunning tongues. Our destination, Lord Fenwick's mansion, stood on the outskirts of the city, a grand structure set amidst overgrown gardens and towering palms, a testament to old money and aristocratic pride. As we were admitted by a stern-faced butler, I couldn't help but notice the nervous glances of the household staff. Clearly, the presence of outsiders stirred unrest. Inside, we were led through a series of stately rooms until we entered the drawing room where Lord Charles Fenwick awaited. He was a man in his late 40s, tall and imposing, with sharp features shadowed by a short beard flecked with gray. His piercing blue eyes scrutinized us as we were introduced. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, Lady Celeste," Fenwick greeted with a formal nod. "Your reputation precedes you. I understand you seek clarity on matters of Algernon Thorne and the San Telmo treasure." Holmes inclined his head. "Lord Fenwick, we are grateful for your time. The governor spoke highly of your insight and your opposition to Elias Rook's machinations." Fenwick's lips curled into a wry smile. "Opposition is a delicate dance in Kingston. Rook's influence extends far beyond his immediate circle. He is ruthless, cunning, and well-funded, but he underestimates those who still hold sway through legacy and loyalty." Lady Celeste interjected smoothly. "We need to understand the scope of Rook's reach. The encrypted letter and the instruments we possess hint at a treasure not merely of gold, but of power. Who else might be complicit?" Fenwick's eyes flickered with something between caution and calculation. "There are whispers of a clandestine cabal within the governor's council, men who seek to use the treasure to bolster their own positions. Names are dangerous to speak aloud, but there is one faction loyal to Rook, and another, fragmented but determined to preserve order." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And the missing politician, Algernon Thorne? Is it true he staged his disappearance to mislead his adversaries?" Fenwick nodded slowly. Thorne was a man burdened with secrets. His sudden vanishing was as much a gambit as a plea for survival. He left clues, deliberately confusing, to buy time and protect his true intentions. I asked, "Have you any knowledge of Thorne's whereabouts?" Fenwick's expression darkened. "Rumors suggest he remains hidden somewhere within the island, perhaps under guard, perhaps in exile. No one knows for certain, but his silence serves his enemies as much as his allies." The conversation grew tense as Fenwick's butler entered discreetly, whispering into his ear. Fenwick's eyes narrowed. "It seems our time is limited. I advise caution, gentlemen. Rook's men are vigilant and brutal. Any misstep could prove fatal." Holmes rose, his tone resolute. "We shall proceed with utmost care. The secret of the San Telmo and the encrypted letter demand no less." As we departed Fenwick's estate, the afternoon sun dipped behind gathering storm clouds. The threat felt palpable, an unseen hand tightening its grip on Kingston. Lady Celeste murmured, "The governor's court is a nest of vipers. Trust is a luxury none of us can afford." Holmes glanced at the horizon, the weight of the compass still heavy in his coat pocket. "Our next step must be to locate the cartographer Marsh mentioned, a man who may hold the key to deciphering the pirate's map." The city's pulse quickened as evening fell, the streets illuminated by flickering lanterns and the glow of tavern fires. We made our way through winding lanes toward a modest quarter, where the air was thick with salt and the cries of night birds. The cartographer's home was a weathered 2-story building, cluttered with charts and sea charts that spilled from windows and doorways. An elderly man greeted us cautiously, his eyes sharp despite his age. "I am Elias Caro," he said in a gravelly voice. "I hear you seek knowledge of the San Telmo and its secrets." Holmes stepped forward, producing the astrolabe and the compass. Indeed, Mr. Caro, we believe these instruments, along with the encrypted letter, form a puzzle leading to a treasure lost to time. Your charts might illuminate our path. Caro examined the devices with a practiced eye. These are no ordinary instruments. They belong to a lineage of navigators who charted more than seas. They mapped the heavens and the hidden. Over the next several hours, Caro revealed his knowledge of obscure navigational techniques and ancient pirate routes. He showed us faded charts marking the Red Gate, a treacherous reef and cove shrouded in myth. This place, Caro said gravely, is both a trap and a sanctuary. Many who sought the treasure vanished here, swallowed by reefs or betrayed by the tides. Holmes leaned over the charts, tracing a finger along a convoluted route. The cipher in the letter corresponds with the astrolabe's star alignments, which in turn match these currents and landmarks. It all fits. The treasure lies beyond the Red Gate, protected by natural perils and human greed. Lady Celeste's voice was quiet but fierce. Then we must prepare for what awaits. The stakes are greater than gold. They are about survival, legacy, and the truth behind Thorne's disappearance. I looked at Holmes, whose expression was uncharacteristically somber. Have we underestimated the enemy, or the cost of this pursuit? Holmes's eyes glittered with resolve. We have only begun to scratch the surface, Watson. The deeper we delve, the darker the shadows become. Outside, the night deepened, the sea breeze carrying whispers of secrets long buried and dangers yet to come. Chapter 12, The Web Tightens. The days that followed were a blur of restless pursuit and cautious inquiry. Kingston's streets, once mere veins of commerce and chatter, transformed beneath our feet into arteries pulsing with conspiracy and peril. Holmes, Lady Celeste, and I had no illusions, each step closer to the San Telmo's secret unearthed new dangers and new adversaries. The cartographer, Elias Caro, proved invaluable. His faded charts and intimate knowledge of the treacherous coastal reefs gave us direction, but the answers we sought lay still concealed beneath layers of deception. The cipher in the letter began to unravel, revealing not just coordinates but warnings, coded references to traps set by the pirate captain to safeguard his hoard. Our investigation led us next to a shadowed tavern by the docks, known as the Rusted Anchor. Here, whispers carried more weight than coin, and information was a commodity, traded in furtive glances and cryptic nods. Holmes's reputation preceded him, and as we entered, the room's din hushed momentarily. We sought a man named Silas Griggs, a former smuggler turned informant, whose allegiance to Elias Rook had recently come into question. Holmes's approach was measured, words carefully chosen to persuade rather than provoke. Griggs, Holmes said quietly, we understand you possess knowledge of Rook's movements and his interest in the San Telmo treasure. Cooperation could prove advantageous. Griggs, a wiry man with darting eyes, weighed us silently before nodding. Rook's no fool. He knows the treasure could change everything. But there are factions within his circle, ambitious men who might betray him for their own gain. You're not the only ones chasing shadows. As the evening wore on, Griggs divulged more. Secret rendezvous, coded messages, a plan to seize the treasure before the governor's forces could intervene. The missing politician, Algernon Thorne, was both pawn and player, his staged disappearance a gambit to mislead rivals. Our next move required delicate diplomacy. Lady Celeste arranged a clandestine meeting with an influential councilman suspected of opposing Rook's faction. Under flickering candlelight in a discreet parlor, the councilman confirmed the depth of corruption within the governor's court. Loyalties were bought, alliances forged in shadows, and the prize at stake worth every peril. Holmes's mind raced. The treasure hunt was no mere adventure. It was a fulcrum upon which Kingston's future teetered. To recover the treasure was to grasp power itself. Meanwhile, my role as chronicler and companion brought me closer to the human toll of the intrigue. Thorne's disappearance cast ripples of fear and suspicion, fracturing friendships and fueling vendettas. Lady Celeste's steely resolve masked an undercurrent of anxiety. Her knowledge of the city's power plays made her both invaluable and vulnerable. One moonless night, as we pored over Caro's charts and the decoded fragments of the letter, a sudden noise shattered the quiet. Footsteps, heavy, purposeful, echoed outside. Holmes sprang to the window just as shadowy figures emerged from the darkness, bearing weapons and malice. "Prepare yourself, Watson," he murmured. "We are no longer merely hunters, but the hunted." What followed was a desperate struggle through narrow alleyways, the night air thick with the scent of salt and danger. Our pursuers were relentless, but Holmes's keen intellect and knowledge of Kingston's backstreets allowed us to evade capture. Though the message was clear, others would stop at nothing to claim the San Telmo's secret. As dawn broke, we found refuge in a forgotten chapel overlooking the harbor. Holmes's gaze was intense, his mind already racing ahead. "The final pieces are in motion," he said. "Thorne's disappearance, Rook's ambitions, the treasure's lure, they all converge toward one reckoning. We must act swiftly and decisively." Lady Celeste's voice was steady but resolute. "And what of the others involved? The traitors within our midst?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "We will unmask them. But first, we must reach the Red Gate before our enemies do. The treasure waits beyond, but so does peril." The secret of the San Telmo was no longer merely a puzzle. It was a battle for survival, power, and the soul of Kingston itself. And as the first light of morning painted the harbor gold, we prepared to step into the storm. The morning's fragile light filtered through the stained glass windows of the abandoned chapel, casting fractured hues upon the weathered stone floor. Outside, the harbor lay quiet, but for the distant creak of rigging and the low murmur of early risers. Yet inside, the air was thick with urgency. Holmes stood over the worn maps, his fingers tracing the intricate lines that marked the reefs and coves of Kingston's perilous coastline. The astrolabe and compass lay beside him, instruments of navigation and cipher alike. Lady Celeste paced, her mind clearly weighed down by the stakes we faced. I could not shake the feeling that the shadows we chased extended far beyond the San Telmo's treasure, that the very foundations of power in Kingston were at risk. Holmes spoke without looking up. "The clues indicate that the treasure's final resting place lies beyond the Red Gate, a narrow passage between jagged reefs. Navigating it requires not just skill, but knowledge of tides, celestial alignments, and the encoded warnings left by the pirate captain himself." Lady Celeste paused, her eyes sharp. "And Rook, what of his movements?" Holmes's gaze sharpened. "His network grows bolder. Griggs's information was clear. Rook's men plan to converge on the treasure site within days. They intend to seize it before any interference can thwart them." I frowned. "We must reach it first, then. But how? The waters near the Red Gate are treacherous at best." Holmes's lips curled into a faint smile. "That is where our knowledge and our allies come into play." The day unfolded in a flurry of preparation. Lady Celeste dispatched discreet messages to trusted contacts within the city, sailors, cartographers, even those sympathetic council members wary of Rook's ambitions. Meanwhile, Holmes and I secured passage on a modest schooner captained by a grizzled mariner named Samuel Kiernan, a man whose reputation for navigating perilous waters was matched only by his taciturn demeanor. As dusk approached, the schooner slipped quietly from the harbor, its sails catching the evening breeze. The city's lights faded behind us, swallowed by the night as we ventured toward the unknown. Holmes remained on deck long after the sun dipped below the horizon, the compass held firmly in his hand. "The pirate's cipher relies on star positions," he murmured, eyes fixed skyward. "By aligning the astrolabe with key constellations, we can chart a course that evades hidden reefs and leads us directly to the treasure's vault." I stood beside him, the vastness of the sea stretching before us, a daunting reminder of the risks we faced. "And the others? Rook and his men?" Holmes's expression darkened. "They are swift, ruthless, and well-informed. We must assume they are already on the move." Our first night at sea was restless, the schooner buffeted by restless waves and shifting winds. Kiernan's gruff commands kept the crew steady, while Holmes meticulously adjusted our heading, consulting his instruments and the cryptic charts we had gathered. At dawn, a faint silhouette appeared on the horizon, a brigantine flying no colors, cutting through the mist with ominous intent. "Rook's ship," Lady Celeste whispered, a note of steel beneath her fear. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "They seek to intercept us before we reach the Red Gate. Prepare yourself, Watson." What followed was a tense game of cat and mouse, the schooner weaving through narrow channels and hidden coves, the brigantine hot on our trail. Holmes's intimate knowledge of Kingston's coastline allowed us to skirt treacherous waters that would have dashed a less skilled captain's vessel to pieces. Finally, we reached the Red Gate, a narrow, jagged channel where the sea roared and churned, reefs rising like silent sentinels beneath the waves. Kiernan's hands were steady at the helm, guided by Holmes's precise calculations. The schooner slipped through the perilous passage, the compass needle quivering as it aligned with the astrolabe's readings. Behind us, the brigantine faltered, unable to navigate the hidden dangers. Relief was short-lived. As we anchored in a sheltered cove beyond the reefs, Holmes turned to us, his gaze grave. The treasure is close, but so too is danger of a different kind. The secrets hidden here are protected not just by nature, but by men willing to kill. The cliffs above the cove bore carved symbols, cryptic marks matching those in the letter. Holmes studied them closely, piecing together the pirates' warnings. Suddenly, the faint snap of a twig alerted us. From the shadows emerged a figure, masked and swift. "Who goes there?" Holmes demanded. The figure paused, then spoke in a familiar voice. "I am neither friend nor foe, but you tread on dangerous ground." The voice was unmistakable. Algernon Thorne. The figure stepped forward into the dim light cast by the fading sun, revealing the familiar, weathered face of Algernon Thorne, his once impeccable suit now worn and dust-streaked, eyes sharp but shadowed by months of hiding. For a moment, silence held the cove, broken only by the restless lapping of waves against the rocks. "Algernon," Holmes breathed, his tone a mixture of relief and inquiry. "We presumed you vanished for good." Thorne's gaze flickered to Lady Celeste, and then to me. "I had little choice but to disappear," he said, voice low and deliberate. "There are forces at work far more dangerous than mere politics. Elias Rook is only one thread in a much darker tapestry." Lady Celeste's eyes narrowed. "And yet you brought us here, to the treasure's doorstep. Why?" Thorne's expression hardened. "Because I need allies I can trust. Rook's ambition threatens to upend not only my life, but the fragile balance of power across Kingston. I staged my disappearance to throw him and others off the trail, to buy time while I planned my next move." Holmes folded his arms, studying him. "And the letter? The cipher? Was that also part of your ruse?" Thorne nodded slowly. "Yes. The letter contains the map, yes, but also misdirection. Only a few can decode it fully. I hoped it would divert attention while I sought the true location and secured the treasure." I stepped forward, my curiosity getting the better of me. "Then why reveal yourself now? Why risk coming out of hiding?" Thorne's eyes darkened. "Because Rook grows impatient. He has men searching every inch of Kingston. I feared that if he reached the treasure first, the consequences would be catastrophic. There are other factions, some more ruthless than Rook, willing to kill for what lies beneath." Holmes's voice was low, intense. "Other factions? Are you suggesting a deeper conspiracy?" Thorne glanced around cautiously before speaking. "Yes, there are interests tied to the Empire itself. Men who would prefer this secret remain buried, who see the treasure not as gold, but as leverage over colonial governance and trade." Lady Celeste's expression was grave. "You mean to say that this hunt has implications far beyond personal greed?" Thorne's gaze was steady. "Precisely. This is about control, over wealth, over the city, and over the very fate of the island." Holmes considered this. "Then we are not merely chasing treasure. We are navigating a minefield of political intrigue and deadly ambition." A sharp crack echoed from the cliffside, a warning shot, or a threat. We turned to see figures emerging from the shadows, armed and resolute. Rook's men. "Time is short," Thorne said urgently. "We must move now, before they surround us." Kiernan moved swiftly, preparing the schooner for a hasty departure, but Holmes shook his head. "No. The treasure lies inland, hidden beneath layers of natural and human defenses. We must proceed carefully." As the tension thickened, Lady Celeste produced a small folded note from her glove. This arrived while we sailed. A warning from a source within the governor's court, someone who fears Rook's ascent. Holmes took the note, eyes scanning the delicate script. "A cipher within a cipher," he mused. "This confirms what Thorne says. Many seek the treasure, and many more wish to keep it hidden." The cove's peace shattered as a volley of gunfire erupted from the approaching assailants. Holmes drew his pistol, Lady Celeste moving with practiced agility to cover. I steadied my own weapon, heart pounding as the night ignited with violence. The firefight was brief but fierce. Using the cove's rocky terrain, we managed to repel the attackers, though not without cost. One of Rook's men was captured, a gaunt-faced youth whose eyes betrayed fear more than resolve. Holmes advanced, voice cold but persuasive. "You will tell us everything you know about Rook's plans, or the consequences will be dire." The boy hesitated, then broke under the weight of Holmes's steely gaze. "They're gathering forces at Fort Charlotte," he revealed, "planning a final assault to seize the treasure and crush any opposition. Rook wants the map, the astrolabe, and your head." Lady Celeste's jaw clenched. "Then our window narrows. We must reach the treasure before the assault and expose the corruption that fuels it." Thorne stepped forward, resolve hardening his features. "I will help guide you through the remaining challenges. My knowledge is incomplete, but it is vital." Holmes nodded, his mind already racing through possibilities. "Then there's no time to lose. Watson, prepare yourself. We enter the heart of danger tomorrow." As darkness descended once more, the weight of the coming confrontation settled over us all. The secret of the San Telmo was no longer a puzzle to solve, but a battleground where lives, loyalties, and legacies would be tested, and at the center of it all stood the truth, waiting to be claimed, or to consume us all. Chapter 13. The Fortress and the False Friend. The first pale light of dawn crept hesitantly over Kingston's jagged skyline, but inside the schooner's cramped cabin, time seemed to have slowed. The air was thick with a tension that needed no words. Holmes sat at the small wooden table, his sharp gaze fixed on the scattered maps and notes before him. Beside him, Lady Celeste moved with precise purpose, checking their modest arsenal and double-checking the charts with a practiced eye. I kept watch at the narrow porthole, my thoughts tangled in the gravity of what lay ahead. Algernon Thorne, now fully revealed as more than a vanished politician, perhaps a man caught between shadow and light, was restless, his usual composure betrayed by occasional flickers of doubt and weariness. This was no mere treasure hunt. It was a game played on a board far larger than any of us had first realized. Holmes broke the silence, voice calm but resolute. "Fort Charlotte. It is a relic of the old empire, long since reduced to ruins, but its stone walls and hidden tunnels remain formidable. Rook and his men have chosen it as their stronghold. From there, they intend to launch their assault on the treasure's location and on us." Lady Celeste's eyes darkened. "And the councilmen who oppose Rook? Can we trust their aid?" Holmes's mouth twitched in a ghost of a smile. "In politics, trust is always provisional, but they are our best hope for intelligence and potentially reinforcements." I leaned forward. "What of the captive? The youth from the firefight? Can he truly be trusted?" Holmes's eyes never wavered from the maps. "He is a frightened boy, manipulated by greed and threats, but fear is a more reliable motive than loyalty. We will glean what we can, but vigilance is imperative." A soft knock at the cabin door interrupted us. Kiernan, the stoic captain, entered with news. "A messenger waits at the shore. He claims to have information, urgent and unsolicited." Holmes nodded. "Bring him in." The door swung open to reveal a gaunt man, cloaked and hooded, his face shadowed but eyes sharp with urgency. He stepped forward, handing Holmes a folded parchment sealed with a strange emblem, a serpent entwined around an anchor. Holmes broke the seal and scanned the letter rapidly. His face paled, just slightly. "This changes matters," he said quietly. Lady Celeste leaned over. "What is it?" Holmes folded the letter carefully. "It is a warning from within Rook's own circle, a faction discontented with his leadership, seeking to undermine him by revealing a traitor in his midst. They claim to know who seeks to claim the treasure for their own dark designs, someone close to us." Thorne's eyes narrowed sharply. "A traitor? Among us?" Holmes nodded grimly. "It appears so. The game is deeper than we imagined. We must proceed with extreme caution." The rest of the day was spent in preparation and planning. The schooner skirted the coastline, closing in on Fort Charlotte under the cloak of evening. We moved silently, each of us acutely aware that the approaching confrontation would not merely decide the fate of the treasure, but potentially the destiny of Kingston itself. The ruins of Fort Charlotte rose from the rocky promontory like a beast sleeping beneath a veil of mist and shadow. Its crumbling battlements and shattered towers hinted at a forgotten past, but the flicker of torchlight within spoke of recent occupation. Holmes, Lady Celeste, Thorne, Kiernan, and I approached the fort's gate cautiously, taking advantage of a narrow, overgrown path leading to a less guarded entrance. Every step echoed the weight of the coming danger. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp stone and rusted iron. We moved with practiced stealth, our footsteps muffled against the cold floor. Holmes's eyes flicked to the shadows, noting the signs of recent activity, discarded weapons, hastily scrawled markings, the occasional glint of gold coins left carelessly behind. We reached a chamber illuminated by a single flickering lantern, where two figures awaited us. One was an older man, gaunt and pale, wearing the uniform of a disillusioned officer. The other was a younger woman, her expression wary but determined. "You must be the ones the letter spoke of," the man said, his voice a low rasp. "I am Captain Elias Brand, once a loyal man of the Crown, now a prisoner of Rook's ambition. This is my daughter, Miriam. We want to help." Holmes stepped forward. "You bear grave knowledge, Captain. Tell us everything." Brand's eyes darted nervously. "Rook's plan is more than mere plunder. He seeks to sell the treasure to the highest bidder, foreign powers eager to destabilize the colony. But there is a deeper betrayal. One of your own circle, someone close, has been feeding Rook information." Miriam added, "We intercepted messages between Rook and a man known only as the Fox. We believe he is within your ranks, Holmes. His identity remains unknown, but his influence is dangerous." Thorne clenched his fists. "Then we are indeed caught in a web of lies and deceit. We must find the Fox before it is too late." Holmes nodded sharply. "Agreed, but first we must secure the fort and gain control before Rook's forces return." As we plotted our next move, the distant sound of marching feet echoed through the stone corridors, a reminder that time was running out. The fortress was alive with menace, its halls thick with secrets and danger. We had stepped into the lion's den, and the lion was stirring. The muted clatter of footsteps reverberated through the ancient stone corridors of Fort Charlotte, a grim cadence echoing through the chilly air like the beat of a death knell. Holmes motioned us to follow closely, every sense sharpened as we pressed deeper into the bowels of the fortress. Captain Elias Brand and his daughter Miriam led the way, their faces taut with a mix of hope and fear. "The sentries rotate every 15 minutes, Brand whispered, and their patrols follow predictable routes. If we are swift, we can secure the armory and cut off Rook's reinforcements." Lady Celeste's eyes narrowed. "A direct assault would be folly. We need to control the choke points and use the fortress's own design against them." Holmes nodded approvingly. "Precisely. The architects of this place favored narrow passages and hidden chambers, a maze to confound invaders. We shall exploit these advantages." As we moved, I could not help but notice the layers of history etched into the walls, faded heraldry, graffiti left by long-forgotten soldiers, scars from battles long past. The atmosphere was oppressive, yet charged with the weight of secrets yet to be revealed. We reached the armory, a heavy iron door, bolted but not locked. With Miriam's deft hands, the door creaked open to reveal racks of muskets, pistols, powder, and blades, long since untouched but surprisingly well preserved. "We'll arm ourselves," Holmes instructed quietly, "and prepare for the inevitable confrontation." As we gathered weapons, a sudden noise from the adjacent hallway froze us mid-motion, a muffled voice, urgent and familiar. "Holmes, Watson, it's me." From the shadows emerged a figure whose presence sent a ripple of shock through our group. It was Gregory Mallory, the governor's own aide and a man we had believed steadfastly loyal. Holmes's brow furrowed. "Mallory? How came you here, and in such secrecy?" Mallory's eyes darted nervously. "I have been working undercover, attempting to root out Rook's network from within the governor's administration. But my cover was blown. I escaped capture only by sheer luck. I came to warn you. Rook's reach is greater than we imagined. The man known as the Fox is none other than—" His voice dropped to a whisper. "The governor's chief advisor, Sir Edmund Kingsley." A stunned silence fell over us. Sir Edmund Kingsley, the man who had publicly condemned Rook's ambitions, was instead the hidden mastermind, manipulating both sides for his own gain. Lady Celeste's eyes blazed with fury. A traitor in the highest office. This explains much. The sudden shifts in policy, the secret shipments, the betrayals. Thorne clenched his fists. So the very government meant to protect Kingston has been complicit in this conspiracy. Holmes's gaze hardened. We must move swiftly. If Kingsley learns we know, he will strike to eliminate us. Suddenly, the faintest creak sounded from the far end of the armory. We turned just in time to see a shadow slip behind a pillar, an assassin's dagger glinting in the flickering lantern light. Holmes reacted instantly, throwing himself between the weapon and Thorne. The dagger embedded itself in the wooden doorframe, mere inches from Thorne's side. "By Jove!" I exclaimed, drawing my pistol. "They know we are here." Mallory grimaced. "There are more like that. Kingsley's loyalists within the fort. We cannot trust anyone but ourselves." Holmes barked orders. "Miriam, take Lady Celeste and secure the eastern passage. Mallory, you and I will cover the western stairwell. Thorne and Watson hold the central hall. We hold this fort, or we die trying." The tension coiled tighter as we moved into position. Every shadow threatened betrayal. Every footstep could be the harbinger of death. Minutes stretched into agonizing eternity until the sounds of battle erupted, shouts, gunfire, and the clash of steel. In the chaos, I caught glimpses of courage and desperation. Lady Celeste's precise shots disabling foes with cold efficiency, Holmes's unerring calm directing our defense, Thorne fighting with the fury of a man reclaiming lost honor. Mallory's voice cut through the din. "Kingsley has sent reinforcements. They come by the secret tunnel beneath the fortress." Holmes cursed under his breath. "Then we must seal the tunnel before they flank us." We raced through winding corridors to the subterranean chamber, where the tunnel gaped like a wound beneath the fort. With grim determination, we piled stones and overturned carts to block the passage. As the sounds of enemy footsteps grew louder, we prepared for the final stand. The treasure, the secrets, the fate of Kingston, all balanced on the edge of a blade. Holmes turned to us, his eyes blazing with resolve. "This is the crucible, gentlemen, and lady. We either walk out of these walls victorious, or we become part of the fortress's dark history." And so, beneath the weight of stone and shadow, the battle for the San Telmo's secret reached its fevered pitch. Chapter 14. Shadows of Betrayal. The subterranean chamber's air was thick with dust and dread, every breath a sharp reminder of the peril we faced. We had barricaded the secret tunnel as best we could, but the muffled thuds of reinforcements pounding against our defenses echoed through the stone like the slow ticking of a grim clock. Holmes stood at the forefront, his keen eyes piercing the dimness, every muscle taut with readiness. Beside him, Mallory's hands trembled slightly, a man burdened by guilt yet determined to atone. "Hold fast," Holmes commanded, voice steady and commanding. "They will try to force their way through. Remember, we are defending more than stone and mortar. We defend truth, justice, and the very soul of Kingston." Lady Celeste and Miriam worked swiftly to load muskets and tend to the wounded, their faces pale but resolute. Thorne paced like a caged lion, his mind racing through strategies and contingencies. I kept my fingers tight around my pistol's grip, every instinct screaming for vigilance. The assault came with brutal suddenness, a violent clash of steel, shouts, and the sharp report of muskets. Kingsley's men poured into the chamber, faces twisted with rage and desperation, their loyalty bought by promises of power and gold. Holmes met the first wave head-on, his movements fluid and precise as he disarmed and incapacitated foes with calculated strikes. Mallory fought beside him, his earlier fear replaced by a grim determination to protect what remained of his shattered honor. Amid the chaos, a chilling voice rose above the din, icy, authoritative, and unmistakable. "Holmes, you are fools to defy the governor's will. Surrender, and perhaps your lives will be spared." From the shadows emerged Sir Edmund Kingsley himself, flanked by 2 heavily armed guards. His eyes gleamed with cold ambition, a serpent coiled to strike. Holmes stepped forward, eyes locked with the traitor. "Kingsley, your duplicity ends here. Kingston will not fall to your greed and treachery." Kingsley laughed, a cruel, humorless sound. "Greed? Treachery? No, Mr. Holmes. I serve a higher purpose, the Empire's destiny, shaped by those strong enough to wield its power. You and your companions are mere obstacles." With a swift motion, Kingsley signaled his guards to attack. The battle resumed with renewed ferocity, every second fraught with life or death stakes. As steel clashed and gunpowder smoke curled around us, Lady Celeste engaged one guard with a blade, her movements graceful yet deadly. Miriam, despite her youth, fought valiantly to protect her father. In the thick of the struggle, Thorne found himself face to face with a familiar adversary, a man he recognized from his political circles, a corrupt magistrate allied with Kingsley. "Jones!" Thorne spat, fury burning. "I should have known you were complicit," Jones sneered. "Loyalty is a commodity, Mr. Thorne, one you seem to have forgotten." Their duel was fierce, the clang of their swords echoing off the stone walls. Meanwhile, Holmes cornered Kingsley near the chamber's exit. "It ends now, Kingsley. You will answer for your crimes." Kingsley smirked, drawing a concealed pistol. Before he could fire, a sharp crack rang out. The shot echoed through the chamber as Holmes dodged, the bullet grazing the wall. In the confusion, Mallory lunged, tackling Kingsley to the ground. The struggle was brutal, but Mallory's desperation gave him strength. With a final effort, he wrested the pistol away and pressed it against Kingsley's temple. "Enough," Mallory hissed. "Your reign is over." Kingsley glared, defeated but unrepentant. "You think this changes anything? The Empire's reach is long, Mr. Mallory. You have merely delayed the inevitable." Holmes stepped forward, handcuffing Kingsley with the governor's own chains. "Justice is not a matter of inevitability, Kingsley. It is earned." As the dust settled, the remnants of Kingsley's force surrendered or fled into the darkness. We were victorious, but the cost weighed heavily. Thorne approached Holmes, breathing hard. "The treasure. What of it? Has it been found?" Holmes gestured to a hidden panel in the chamber's wall. With a few deft movements, the panel slid open, revealing a narrow passage descending into the earth. "The final secret lies beyond," Holmes said, eyes alight with discovery. "But this victory is but a prelude. There are still mysteries to unravel and dangers to face." Lady Celeste glanced toward the passage, her voice steady. "Then let us not tarry. The truth awaits." Together, we stepped into the shadowed corridor, the weight of history and hope pressing upon us as the secret of the San Telmo beckoned deeper into the darkness. The narrow passage beyond the hidden panel yawned before us like the mouth of some ancient beast, cool and dark, the scent of damp stone and time long past pressing in on every side. Holmes paused for a moment, producing a slender candle from his coat pocket and lighting it with deliberate care. The flickering flame cast long shadows against the walls, revealing the rough-hewn contours of the subterranean corridor. "This must be the ancient escape route," Holmes observed quietly, stepping forward with practiced ease. "Designed centuries ago to provide a secret exit for those within the fort, or perhaps to allow surreptitious ingress when the tides of war shifted." Lady Celeste drew her shawl tighter, eyes sharp in the dim light. "A clever design. It means Rook and his allies may have used this very passage to move unseen." Thorne, still catching his breath from the earlier fight, muttered, "Or to hide what they'd rather not be found." The corridor was narrow, forcing us to walk single file, the walls slick with moisture and streaked with centuries-old moss. The air grew cooler as we descended, and every step seemed to echo with the whispers of history. The only sound beyond our measured breathing was the faint drip of water somewhere ahead. Holmes halted suddenly, holding up a gloved hand. "Stop." We came to a rough-hewn chamber. The ceiling low and the walls inscribed with faded markings, symbols and numbers intertwined in an arcane script. Holmes knelt to examine them closely, his eyes narrowing in concentration. "Remarkable," he murmured. "These markings appear to be a cipher, encoded directions and warnings for those who knew the route. They reference the old pirate code of Captain Elias Blackthorne, infamous in these waters." Lady Celeste traced a finger over the etchings. "Blackthorne? The legend says his ship, the San Telmo, sank with a great treasure, gold, jewels, and artifacts of immense value." Holmes nodded. "Indeed, and it seems this fortress was more than a military bastion. It was a guardian of that secret. The code here leads to the treasure's resting place, cleverly hidden from all but the initiated." Thorne exhaled slowly. "So it's true. The legend is real." "Not just legend," Holmes replied, "but danger. The cipher also warns of traps and guardians, mechanical and natural, that protect the treasure." He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and began transcribing the symbols, muttering calculations and deductions as he worked. Suddenly, Miriam stepped forward, her voice hushed but urgent. "Look here." She pointed to a part of the wall where a carved emblem of a serpent coiled around an anchor stood out more prominently. Embedded in the stone beneath it was a small, rusted iron ring. Holmes's eyes gleamed with recognition. A lever. An ancient mechanism, no doubt. Carefully, please. With delicate care, he pulled the ring. A deep rumble resonated through the chamber as part of the wall slowly shifted, revealing a hidden stairwell descending further into darkness. We exchanged wary glances. The air grew heavier, tinged with the promise of discovery and peril. "I suggest we proceed with caution," Holmes advised. "The secrets of Blackthorn's treasure have claimed many lives. We must not add to their number." One by one, we descended the spiral staircase, the faint glow of Holmes's candle leading us into the unknown. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes widening into small chambers filled with relics, sometimes narrowing until we moved almost on hands and knees. Hours seemed to pass, or perhaps only moments. The mind plays tricks in such gloom, until at last we arrived at a vast cavern, its walls glittering with veins of quartz and faint traces of mineral deposits. At its center lay a chest, weathered and bound with rusted iron, the faintest hint of a lock visible beneath layers of grime. Holmes stepped forward, his fingers deftly exploring the ancient mechanisms. "This is it, the heart of the mystery." Before he could work the lock, a sudden sharp sound echoed, a footfall, deliberate and slow. We spun toward the cavern's mouth to find Rook himself, flanked by two of his men, their weapons drawn. "So, you've made it far," Rook sneered, "but the treasure will not be yours. Not while I draw breath." Holmes's gaze was ice. "Rook, your greed has blinded you, but justice has found you at last." The final confrontation loomed, the air crackling with tension. In this stony cathedral of secrets, destinies would be decided. The cavern's silence shattered like glass under Rook's derisive laugh, his men tightening their grip on their weapons as they stepped forward, eyes glittering with menace. The faint flicker of Holmes's candle cast dancing shadows on the walls, flickers that seemed to animate the ancient stones with the ghostly whispers of the past. Holmes stood his ground, his posture composed yet unyielding. "You underestimate the lengths we will go to protect what is rightfully ours, and what you have stolen." Rook's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Rightfully yours? The treasure belongs to those bold enough to claim it. Men like me who seize destiny by the throat and refuse to let go." I felt Thorne tighten his fist beside me, the tension palpable. Lady Celeste's eyes flicked to the rusted chest, her fingers twitching as if itching for action. "Enough words," Rook snarled, signaling his men to advance. But Holmes was faster. With a sudden, fluid motion, he grabbed a loose rock from the cavern floor and flung it toward the far side of the chamber. The projectile struck the cavern wall with a sharp crack, sending down a shower of pebbles and dust. "Now!" Holmes barked. In that moment of distraction, Miriam and Lady Celeste lunged forward, taking advantage of the narrowness of the cavern entrance to engage Rook's men in close combat. Steel clanged, muskets cracked, and the battle erupted into chaotic fury. Rook himself charged at Holmes, a gleam of desperate rage in his eyes. Their clash was fierce. Holmes's agility and precision matched against Rook's brute strength and reckless ferocity. Every strike echoed the weight of years of animosity and greed. As the fight raged, I found myself face to face with one of Rook's henchmen. The man sneered, brandishing a heavy cudgel. We circled, each waiting for the other to make the first fatal move. The cavern walls closed in, the air thick with the scent of sweat, dust, and gunpowder. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the fray. I turned to see Miriam grappling with another attacker, struggling to break free as a blade flashed dangerously close. "Hold fast!" Holmes shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. With a sudden burst of strength, Holmes disarmed Rook, sending his weapon clattering across the cavern floor. Rook fell back, snarling with frustration but defiant. Before Holmes could press the advantage, a low rumble shook the cavern. Dust fell from the ceiling as the ancient stones responded to the disturbance of the fight. Holmes's eyes widened. The traps! The treasure is protected, not just by men, but by the very structure itself. A section of the cavern floor began to shift, revealing hidden spikes and pits meant to ensnare the unwary. With moments to spare, Holmes pulled Rook and the others back from the deadly edge. Thorne and Lady Celeste rallied the others, and together we pushed forward, forcing Rook and his men to retreat amidst the collapsing stones and sudden hazards. Finally, as the dust settled and silence reclaimed the cavern, Holmes turned to the chest once more. His fingers deftly manipulated the ancient lock, and with a soft click, it opened. Inside lay the glittering prize, a trove of gold coins, jeweled trinkets, and a weathered, leather-bound journal. Holmes picked up the journal, blowing off the dust carefully. "This," he said, "may hold the true secret of the San Telmo and the key to understanding the full extent of this mystery." As we gathered the treasure and prepared to leave the cavern, a sense of wary triumph settled over us. But deep in the shadows, a pair of eyes watched silently, a new threat waiting to emerge from the darkness. Chapter 15, The Hidden Ledger. The cavern's cold air seemed to thicken as Holmes carefully lifted the worn leather-bound journal from the chest. Its surface cracked and stained with the passage of years. The flickering candlelight danced over the faded gold lettering embossed on its cover. The Ledger of Elias Blackthorne. Even the name alone stirred the imagination. Blackthorne? The infamous pirate captain whose lost ship had haunted the Caribbean's legends for centuries. Holmes settled himself against the cavern's rough wall, the journal resting on his knees. His fingers traced the cracked leather with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with his usual brisk efficiency. "This ledger," Holmes began, "could be the most significant piece of evidence we have, far more valuable than gold or jewels. It may explain not only the treasure's origins, but also the intricate web of alliances, betrayals, and ambitions tied to it." Lady Celeste moved closer, her sharp eyes scanning the edges of the open pages, eager to glimpse the secrets within. The first entries were in a cramped, looping script, detailing the day-to-day exploits of Captain Blackthorne and his crew, their voyages, battles, and, crucially, their dealings with colonial governors and merchants. Holmes read aloud a passage, his voice steady but low. "The San Telmo's riches are not mere gold, but a ledger of debts and promises, sealed by blood and gunpowder. This book holds the map of influence, a web spun across islands and continents. To possess it is to hold the power to shape empires." A murmur passed among us. The treasure was more than wealth. It was leverage. Holmes continued to leaf through the brittle pages, finding coded entries, symbols, and references that seemed to mirror the cipher etched on the walls beneath Fort Charlotte. "Observe," he said, pointing to a series of intricate diagrams and cryptic annotations. Blackthorne anticipated that his treasure would become the prize of many, and he took pains to encode its location and the nature of its guardians. Thorne frowned. "Guardians? You mean traps?" "Not only mechanical traps," Holmes replied, eyes gleaming. Blackthorne's treasure was protected by men sworn to secrecy, and by the promises made in this ledger, which binds the descendants of his crew and his enemies alike. Miriam, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "So the treasure is a kind of contract? A legacy of power?" "Exactly," Holmes confirmed. "And that explains why the governor's office has been so deeply entangled in this mystery. The ledger's influence reaches far beyond mere coin." Lady Celeste's gaze hardened. "Then those who seek to control the treasure are also seeking to control the political fate of the colony." "Indeed," Holmes said gravely. "Our task is not only to recover the treasure, but to ensure that its power does not fall into the wrong hands." A sudden movement at the cavern's mouth caught our attention. Holmes's sharp eyes spotted a figure slipping through the shadows. A silent witness, or another foe, perhaps. "Stay alert," Holmes warned. "The hunt is far from over." With the ledger secured and the treasure in our possession, the true challenge lay ahead. Deciphering Blackthorne's cryptic legacy, navigating the treacherous currents of loyalty and betrayal, and confronting the forces still lurking in the shadows. As we prepared to leave the cavern, the weight of history and destiny pressed upon us. The secret of the encrypted letter was only the beginning. Holmes closed the leather-bound ledger with a soft thud, his fingers lingering for a moment on its worn cover. The treasure's glitter had paled beside the significance of this volume, a map not only of hidden wealth, but of human ambition and peril. "The ledger," Holmes mused, "is far more than a mere account of goods and gold. It records names, alliances, and debts, each entry a thread in a web that stretches across decades, even centuries." I glanced at Lady Celeste, whose expression was grave. "So this is why the governor's office was so desperate to control the treasure, isn't it? It's not just riches, it's political leverage. Holmes nodded sharply. Precisely, Lady Celeste. Whoever controls this ledger controls not just fortune, but the balance of power in these islands. He turned the brittle pages again, eyes narrowing on a passage written in a hurried scrawl. Here, notice the frequent mentions of the Brotherhood, a secret society, perhaps, formed to protect or exploit Blackthorn's legacy. Thorne frowned. Brotherhood? So the governor isn't the only player. There are others who've kept this secret, passed down through generations? Exactly. Holmes' voice was grim. And if Rook was one, then it stands to reason others remain in the shadows, ready to strike. Miriam's eyes flickered with concern. Do you think that's why my father disappeared? Because he uncovered too much? Holmes looked at her with a rare softness. I do. Your father understood the ledger's true power and the dangers that accompany it. A sudden noise echoed from the cavern's entrance, the soft scrape of boots against stone. Everyone tensed. Holmes lifted his candle, revealing a slender figure stepping forward from the shadows. A man, unfamiliar, but carrying the quiet confidence of one accustomed to secrets. I mean no harm, the man said calmly. I am Elias Hawthorne, descendant of one of Blackthorne's trusted crew. Holmes eyed him with suspicion. And what brings you here, Mr. Hawthorne? To retrieve the ledger, Hawthorne replied. It was entrusted to my family to prevent its misuse. Lady Celeste stepped forward, voice steady but wary. And why reveal yourself now? Why not remain hidden? Hawthorne's gaze darkened. Because others hunt the treasure and the ledger with deadly intent. I seek an alliance to protect what Blackthorne left behind. Holmes exchanged a quick glance with the others before nodding slowly. Very well. But know this. Trust is a currency more valuable than gold. Any betrayal will be met with swift justice. Hawthorne inclined his head. Understood. As we prepared to depart the cavern, the ledger safely in our possession, I felt the weight of the mystery deepen. The encrypted letter, the treasure, the hidden ledger, they were all pieces of a puzzle that could topple empires or destroy lives. The game was far from over. The narrow passage back to the surface felt smaller, the shadows pressing in as if to remind us that the true dangers were only just beginning. Elias Hawthorne's presence among us added a new layer of uncertainty. His quiet confidence was tempered by the weight of his heritage, but trust was a fragile thing in these dark times. Holmes walked beside me, the ledger carefully wrapped in a cloth beneath his coat. His eyes, sharp and contemplative, seemed to pierce the dim tunnel ahead. This ledger, he said softly, is the key not only to Blackthorne's fortune, but to understanding the forces that have shaped the colony's politics for generations. Lady Celeste, ever vigilant, nodded, and it explains the governor's desperation. Control of such power could sway decisions in London and beyond. Thorne glanced at Hawthorne, who walked silently behind us. What of your family's role? Why has the ledger remained hidden for so long? Hawthorne spoke, voice measured. My ancestors swore an oath to protect the ledger, ensuring it did not fall into the hands of those who would abuse its power. But as time passed, factions formed, each seeking to claim it for their own ends. Miriam's voice trembled slightly. Then we're not just fighting against Rook and Kinsley. There are others, more dangerous perhaps, lurking in the shadows. Holmes's gaze hardened. Indeed, we must be cautious. The ledger reveals more than treasure. It exposes alliances, betrayals, and a network of influence that spans continents. We emerged into the cool night air, the stars overhead a stark contrast to the darkness we had left behind. The fort loomed silently, its ancient stones guarding secrets older than any of us dared imagine. Holmes paused, looking at each of us in turn. Our next move must be deliberate. We must decipher the ledger fully, identify our allies and enemies, and anticipate the moves of those who seek to claim this power. Lady Celeste stepped forward, resolve etched in her features. We must return to London with this information. The authorities there need to understand what is at stake. Thorne shook his head. London is too distant. The danger is here, among us. We need to act before those who would seize the treasure move against us. Holmes considered this, then nodded. A balance must be struck. We will need to gather more information, uncover who remains loyal, and expose those who plot in the shadows. Hawthorne's eyes glinted. Then let us begin immediately. Time is a luxury we do not possess. As we made our way toward the town, the ledger felt heavier in Holmes's grasp, not just in weight, but in consequence. The secrets of the San Telmo were no longer buried beneath stone and sand. They were alive, dangerous, and within reach. And the game was entering its most perilous phase. Chapter 16, The Reckoning at Blackthorn's End. The London fog wrapped around us like a shroud, damp and suffocating, as Holmes, Lady Celeste, Miriam, Thorne, Elias Hawthorne, and I gathered once more in the familiar sanctum of 221B Baker Street. The ledger of Captain Elias Blackthorne lay open on the cluttered desk, its faded pages strewn with cryptic symbols, coded references, and the unmistakable signature of centuries-old conspiracy. Each carefully illuminated word and diagram seemed to pulse with a hidden life, as though the very parchment breathed secrets eager to be revealed. Holmes's eyes were alight with their usual fierce intensity, though a shadow of weariness now softened his expression. "This ledger," he murmured, "is the culmination of a web spun over centuries, a tangled skein of greed, power, and betrayal that threatens to reshape not just fortunes, but the very governance of the empire." Lady Celeste, ever poised, leaned over the ledger, tracing a faded line of code. "We have uncovered the treasure's location, the alliances forged and broken, and the shadowy brotherhood protecting Blackthorn's legacy. But who among London's elite is part of this brotherhood?" Miriam sat silently, her fingers clutching a handkerchief. "My father disappeared to shield these secrets. I fear the brotherhood's reach is wider and darker than we imagined." Holmes nodded gravely. "Indeed, we face enemies not only desperate but well-placed, those who will stop at nothing to control the ledger, and by extension, the Empire's fate." Thorne, who had returned from scouting the political landscape, spoke with urgency. "Holmes, there are whispers in Whitehall. Certain lords and ministers show unusual interest in the recent events. Their involvement could jeopardize everything." Elias Hawthorne's voice was steady, but filled with resolve. "Then we must act quickly. The ledger points to one final location, the secret cove on Blackthorn's End, where the pirate captain's descendants still guard the treasure's last secret." Holmes tapped a finger on the ledger. "Blackthorn's End, the place where history's shadow lingers longest. It is there we shall confront the Brotherhood and lay bare the conspiracy." The plan was set. We would journey to the rugged coast, under cover of darkness, to infiltrate the Brotherhood's stronghold, unmask the traitors, and secure the ledger's secrets once and for all. The voyage was perilous. We traveled by night, aboard a small, swift cutter, the sea churning beneath us as waves battered the hull like angry sentinels. The stars, obscured by rolling clouds, offered little guidance, but Holmes's unerring sense of direction kept us true. As we neared the rocky cliffs of Blackthorn's End, a cold wind whipped salt spray into our faces. The jagged coastline rose like a fortress, dark and forbidding. "There," whispered Hawthorne, pointing to a narrow fissure in the cliffs, an ancient, almost invisible path leading down to a concealed beach. We disembarked quietly, our footsteps muffled by the roar of crashing waves. The air was thick with anticipation and danger. Navigating the treacherous cliffside path, we arrived at a hidden cave entrance, guarded by crude symbols matching those in the ledger. Holmes produced a small device, an intricate combination lock based on the ledger's cipher, and with a precise twist, the heavy stone door groaned open. Inside, torches flickered, illuminating a subterranean chamber adorned with maritime relics, maps, and portraits of Blackthorn's crew, each a testament to a long line of guardians. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from a side passage. Figures cloaked in shadow emerged, members of the Brotherhood, their faces cold with resolve. "Welcome, Mr. Holmes," intoned a voice from the darkness. Lord Pembroke, a distinguished but sinister figure known in Parliament, stepped forward. "We anticipated your arrival." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Lord Pembroke, so the shadows reach deep indeed." Pembroke smiled thinly. "The ledger is our birthright, a tool to wield influence and protect the Empire's interests. But fools like Rook and Kinsley threaten to upset that balance. You understand now why their removal was necessary." Lady Celeste stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "Your ambition is nothing but greed cloaked in patriotism." Pembroke's eyes darkened. "Patriotism? No, power. And it will be ours, with or without your interference." A sudden roar filled the chamber as Holmes drew a concealed revolver. The Brotherhood lunged, steel flashing in the dim light. A fierce, desperate battle erupted, blows exchanged, bodies clashed against the cold stone, the air thick with the clash of wills. Thorn fought with primal strength, protecting Miriam from a sudden strike. Lady Celeste, quick and precise, disabled several assailants with calculated blows. Elias Hawthorne revealed surprising combat skills, disarming foes with swift efficiency. Holmes moved like a shadow, anticipating every attack, countering with calculated precision. His voice rang out, clear and commanding. To control the ledger is to control history, but history belongs to the truth, not to conspirators. In the chaos, Pembroke made a desperate attempt to seize the ledger. Holmes blocked him, forcing a tense, silent standoff. Then, with a sudden maneuver, Holmes wrested the ledger free and signaled for retreat. Breathless, battered, but victorious, we emerged into the dawn light, the ledger secure. Holmes addressed us quietly. The ledger and the treasure it guards must be safeguarded beyond the reach of ambition. Its secrets will be delivered to those who cherish justice over power. Lady Celeste nodded. We will see that it serves to heal, not divide. Miriam, her eyes shining with a mixture of sorrow and hope, whispered, My father's sacrifice was not in vain. Elias Hawthorne looked toward the rising sun. The past is never truly buried, but it is we who decide its legacy. As the waves crashed below us, the wind carried away the shadows of betrayal and greed. The secret of the encrypted letter, the pirate's treasure, and the ancient ledger had been unveiled, and with it, a promise that justice, however elusive, still endured. Holmes turned to me, a rare smile breaking his usual stoicism. Watson, it seems some mysteries are not just puzzles to be solved, but legacies to be protected. I nodded, feeling the weight and wonder of it all settle deep within. The game was over, for now. But as always with Holmes, the pursuit of truth and the shadow of mystery would never truly end. The dawn's first light spilled across the jagged cliffs of Blackthorn's End, painting the world in hues of gold and rose. The sea, once a tempestuous adversary, now whispered softly against the rocks, as though exhausted by the night's turmoil. We stood together on the precipice, faces streaked with grime and sweat, breaths heavy but hearts steady. The ancient ledger lay safely within Holmes's grasp, its presence a quiet but formidable weight. Holmes's gaze drifted out to the horizon, the sunlight casting long shadows behind us. The ledger is no mere chronicle of pirate spoils. It is a testament to power's seductive nature and the lengths to which men will go to claim it. Lady Celeste, wrapped in a cloak against the rising chill, looked toward the narrow trail that would lead us back to civilization. And what now? The secret's out. What guarantee is there that this peace will last? Holmes gave a slow, thoughtful nod. No guarantee, but knowledge is a double-edged sword. Those who covet power will always exist, but so too will those who guard truth. Miriam stepped forward, her hand resting lightly on the leather cover of the ledger. My father believed the truth could set us free. I believe now he was right, but it will require vigilance, courage, and sacrifice. Thorne, ever pragmatic, cracked his knuckles and offered a wry smile. Sacrifice and courage have been in short supply these past weeks. Let's hope we've got enough left to see this through. Elias Hawthorne's steady eyes met Holmes's. Our families bore this burden for generations. It falls now to us to choose how the next chapter is written. Holmes looked back at the group, the familiar flicker of resolve lighting his features. We have unveiled the conspiracy, bestead those who sought to exploit it, and preserved the ledger's secrets for those with honor. But the fight to keep power in check is unending. History is a living thing, shaped by each generation's choices. A gust of wind stirred the pages of the ledger, flipping to a final unseen chapter. Holmes's finger traced a single line of script, worn but unmistakable. Let the light of truth be the lantern that guides us through the darkness of ambition. He closed the book gently. A fitting reminder. I stepped closer, placing a hand on Holmes's shoulder. So, what becomes of the treasure itself? Holmes smiled faintly, the first genuine warmth I had seen in days. Some treasures are best left undisturbed, their value measured not in gold, but in the lessons they teach. Lady Celeste nodded. Perhaps it is time to ensure that the treasure, the ledger, and all it represents are entrusted to those who will honor its history, guardians, not conquerors. Miriam's eyes shone with renewed purpose. I will dedicate myself to that cause. As we turned from the cliffs, the first true rays of morning illuminated our path. The fog of mystery lifted, but the echoes of our journey remained, a testament to courage, loyalty, and the eternal struggle between light and shadow. Holmes paused briefly, looking back at the cave entrance sealed once more. Watson, the game is never truly over, but for now, we have won a decisive victory. I nodded, heart full, knowing that in this relentless pursuit of truth, there would always be new puzzles to solve, new darkness to illuminate. Together, we walked into the dawn, bound by friendship, purpose, and the unyielding spirit of inquiry that defines us all. Epilogue. Echoes of the ledger. Weeks had passed since the tempest of Blackthorn's End, yet the memory of that fateful night lingered as vividly as the scent of sea salt in the air. London, with its ceaseless bustle and fog-choked streets, seemed unchanged to the casual observer. But those who knew its shadows understood that the game beneath had shifted irrevocably. At 221B Baker Street, the familiar clutter of books, papers, and curiosities awaited Holmes and me, though a certain stillness hung in the air, as if the flat itself were holding its breath after the storm. Holmes sat by the window, the ledger resting closed on the table before him. His keen eyes gazed out onto the busy street, lost in thought. "Watson," he said quietly, "the ledger will remain in trusted hands, safeguarded from those who would exploit it. But the true treasure lies not in the gold or secrets it conceals, but in the knowledge we've gained, that history's shadows are never as dark as the light of truth." I nodded, feeling the weight of those words. Lady Celeste's efforts had begun to bear fruit. The colony's governance had tightened oversight, rooting out corruption seeded by the Brotherhood's influence. Miriam, now a steadfast guardian of the ledger's legacy, had established a discreet society dedicated to protecting its secrets while ensuring they were never again wielded for ill. As for Elias Hawthorne and Thorne, their paths diverged, one to carry on his family's honor, the other to confront new dangers that whispered in the Empire's farthest reaches. Holmes turned from the window, a glint of his old fire returning. "The world is full of puzzles, Watson. Some small, some vast. The encrypted letter was but one thread in an endless tapestry, and so long as there are shadows to pierce, we shall never lack for purpose." I smiled, feeling the familiar stir of anticipation. Whatever mysteries awaited us next, I knew that with Holmes by my side, no secret would remain hidden for long. The game was, as always, afoot. Thank you so much for listening to our Honoring Audiobooks original Sherlock Holmes adventure. We hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to leave a comment letting us know which story you'd like to hear next and where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our detective fans around the world. See you in the next adventure.